The sun blazed over the rolling hills of Sinclair vineyards, bathing the rows of grapevines in golden light. Eloise Sinclair stood on the grand terrace of the estate mansion, her slender fingers tapping impatiently against the marble railing. At 26, she was the picture of cold perfection, sleek blonde hair falling just past her shoulders, designer sundress hugging her trim figure, and eyes the color of expensive blue topaz. "What do you mean they cancelled?" she snapped into her phone, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The Harvest Gala is tonight, Margaret. Tonight, you can't tell me we don't have entertainment." The event planner on the other end of the call stammered apologies, but Eloise had already stopped listening. The annual Harvest Gala was her crown jewel, the social event of the season in California wine country. 200 of the wealthiest and most influential people in the industry would be arriving in just hours, and now she had no entertainment. "Just fix it," she said coldly, before ending the call. Eloise stormed down the marble steps of the terrace, her designer heels clicking against the stone. The staff scurried out of her way as she marched through the gardens, muttering under her breath. Her father was in Europe on business, which meant the success of tonight's event rested entirely on her shoulders. As she rounded the corner near the East Garden, she caught sight of a tall figure kneeling among the hydrangeas. The new gardener. He worked methodically, his hands moving with careful precision as he pruned the bushes. A case of some sort rested against the garden wall nearby. Eloise paused, remembering fragments of staff gossip. This was the new man her estate manager had hired a few months ago. What was his name? Ian? Isaac? No, Isaiah. Isaiah Bell. He kept to himself, did his work well, and carried that case everywhere. Someone had mentioned he played music. A desperate idea formed in her mind. "You," she called out, walking toward him. "Isaiah, isn't it?" The man looked up, rising to his full height. He was taller than she'd realized, with broad shoulders and skin the color of burnished copper. His face was handsome in a serious way, strong jawline, full lips, and dark, intense eyes that didn't immediately lower when they met hers, as most employees did. "Yes, Miss Sinclair," he answered, his voice deep and smooth. "That case," she said, pointing to it, "is that a violin?" Isaiah glanced at the case and nodded once. "It is." "Good. You're playing at the gala tonight." He blinked, the only sign that her words had startled him. "I'm sorry." "Our entertainment cancelled. You work for me and you play the violin." She spoke as if explaining something to a child. "So tonight, I'll play for my guests." A muscle in his jaw tightened. "I'm not a performer, Ms. Sinclair, I'm a gardener. And I'm the person who signs your paychecks," Eloise countered, crossing her arms. "Look, it's just a few songs during cocktail hour. Unless you're terrible, in which case forget I asked." Isaiah's expression remained composed, but something flickered in his eyes, a brief flash of what might have been anger, or perhaps pride. "I'm not terrible," A.E. said quietly. "Then it's settled. Be at the main hall by 7, dressed appropriately." She turned to leave, then paused. "And make sure that thing is tuned. These people can tell the difference." As she walked away, Eloise didn't see the way Isaiah's hands clenched at his sides, or the way he looked down at his violin case with a mixture of longing and reservation. The Sinclair mansion glowed like a jewel as evening fell. Crystal chandeliers sparkled in every room, illuminating floral arrangements that spilled from ornate vases. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Outside, the vineyard hills rolled into the distance, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Eloise greeted her guests with practiced charm, accepting compliments on her emerald evening gown and the exquisite decoration of the grand hall. She laughed at the right moments, touched arms reassuringly, and made introductions between potential business partners. But her eyes kept darting to the entrance, wondering if her gardener would actually show up. At 5 minutes to 7, she spotted him. Isaiah stood in the doorway, almost unrecognizable from the man she'd seen in the garden. He wore a simple black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was neatly trimmed, and he carried his violin case in one hand. He looked, Eloise realized with surprise, like he belonged among her guests rather than among her staff. Several women nearby noticed him too, their conversations faltering as they turned to look. Isaiah didn't seem to notice, his eyes scanning the room until they found Eloise. She made her way to him, offering a tight smile. "You clean up well," she said, trying to sound casual. "Are you ready?" "Yes," he replied simply. "Good. You'll play over there." She pointed to a small raised platform near the grand piano. "Just background music during cocktails, nothing too dramatic." Isaiah nodded, his face giving away nothing of what he might be thinking. Eloise watched him walk to the platform, aware that several of her friends had noticed their interaction. "Eloise, darling, who is that delicious man?" Vanessa Whitmore, daughter of a hotel magnate, sidled up beside her. "Don't tell me you've been hiding him away." "He's just a gardener," Eloise said dismissively. "Our string quartet cancelled, so he's filling in." "A gardener?" Vanessa raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Since when do gardeners look like that?" Before Eloise could respond, she saw Isaiah open his violin case. The instrument he removed was clearly old and well cared for, its wood gleaming softly in the chandelier light. He lifted it to his shoulder with a familiarity that spoke of years of practice. "This should be entertaining G," she murmured to Vanessa with a hint of sarcasm. Then, raising her voice, she called for her guests' attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, while we wait for dinner to be served, I've arranged a little musical interlude." She gestured toward Isaiah with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A performance from our very own groundskeeper." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Several guests exchanged amused glances. Glasses of champagne paused halfway to their lips. Isaiah's eyes met Eloise's across the room. In that moment, something passed between them. A challenge, perhaps, or a promise. Then he lifted his bow to the strings. The first note hung in the air like a drop of water catching light. Pure. Perfect. It was followed by another and another, until they flowed together into a melody that seemed to reach directly into the chest of every person in the room. Eloise's smug smile faded. This W as no amateur fumbling through simple tunes. The music Isaiah created was both technically flawless and deeply emotional, a piece she vaguely recognized as something classical, but transformed by his interpretation. The entire ballroom fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Servers paused with their trays. Every eye turned to the man on the platform, whose body now swayed slightly with the music, eyes closed as his fingers danced over the strings. The piece built slowly, growing in complexity and emotion. It spoke of longing, of beauty found in unexpected places, of dreams deferred but not abandoned. When it reached its crescendo, Eloise felt an unfamiliar tightness in her throat. As the final note faded, the silence that followed was profound. Then, as if released from a spell, the room erupted in applause. Several guests rose to their feet. "My God," whispered Gregory Palmer, a billionaire tech investor standing near Eloise. "Where did you find him? He could be playing with any symphony in the world." Eloise couldn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on Isaiah, who acknowledged the applause with a simple nod before beginning another piece, this one even more haunting than the first. "A gardener, Vanessa said with a knowing smile. "Darling, you've been holding out on us." Throughout dinner, Isaiah continued to play, moving seamlessly between classical pieces and more contemporary compositions. Each one seemed more mesmerizing than the last. Eloise found herself struggling to focus on her guests' conversations, her attention repeatedly drawn to the man whose talent had transformed her ballroom. When the meal ended and the dancing began, Isaiah finally set down his violin. Eloise watched as several guests approached him, offering compliments and business cards. She saw him smile for the first time, a small reserved expression that nonetheless transformed his serious face. She made her way to him as the crowd dispersed, unsure of what to say. "That was unexpected," she finally managed. "Is that a compliment, Mrs. Sinclair?" Isaiah asked, carefully returning his violin to its case. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked instead of answering. "Juilliard," he replied simply. Eloise stared at him. "Juilliard? Then why are you work in G as your gardener?" He closed the violin case with a soft click. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. Before she could respond, Gregory Palmer approached them, his expression eager. "Young man, that was extraordinary," he said, extending his hand to Isaiah. "I'm on the board of the San Francisco Symphony. We need to talk." Isaiah shook his hand. "Thank you, sir, but I'm just filling in tonight." "Nonsense. Talent like yours shouldn't be pruning hedges, no offense to our lovely hostess." Palmer glanced at Eloise before returning his attention to Isaiah. "I'd like you to meet our conductor. Are you free next weekend?" Eloise watched the exchange with a strange feeling in her chest. Isaiah's eyes briefly met hers over Palmer's shoulder, and she saw in them a flicker of something. Hope, perhaps, or vindication. "I'd need to check with my employer," Isaiah said carefully. "Oh, I'm sure Eloise won't mind hiring you for one day," Palmer said with a laugh. "Will you, my dear?" Put on the spot, Eloise forced a smile. "Of course not. Isaiah is free to do as he wishes on his own time." The evening continued, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of the gala. Isaiah's music had transformed a standard social event into something memorable. Guests who normally would have departed early lingered, hoping he might play again. Later, as the last guests were leaving, Eloise found herself standing alone on the terrace. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of grapes and earth from the vineyard below. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Isaiah, violin case in hand, his tie loosened and jacket draped over his arm. "I'm leaving now, Miss Sinclair," he said formally, "unless you need anything else." In the soft outdoor lighting, his features seemed softer, the intensity in his eyes mute by shadows. "No, that's all," she said, then added, "You were good tonight." "Good." A faint smile touched his lips. "Just good." "Fine. You were exceptional." Eloise crossed her arms. "Why didn't you tell anyone you went to Juilliard?" No one asked. He looked out over the vineyard. "People see what they expect to see, Ms. Sinclair. A gardener with dirt under his fingernails, not a violinist." The truth of his words stung her. She hadn't asked either, hadn't cared to know anything about him until tonight. "Well, now everyone knows," she said. "Palmer will probably offer you a position with the symphony." "Perhaps." Isaiah's expression gave nothing away. "Would that bother you?" The question caught her off guard. "Why would it bother me? Because you wouldn't have found me if you hadn't needed something." His dark eyes met hers directly. "Because until tonight I was just the help." Eloise felt her cheek flush with an emotion she wasn't accustomed to. Embarrassment, or perhaps shame. Before she could formulate a response, Isaiah nodded politely. "Good night, Miss Sinclair," he said, turning to leave. "It was an interesting evening." She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows of the garden path that led to the staff quarters. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eloise Sinclair found herself speechless. Inside of the mansion, staff members were cleaning up, removing glasses and plates, folding linens. Everything was returning to normal. But as Eloise made her way up the grand staircase to her rooms, she knew that something fundamental had changed. The music she had heard tonight had stirred something within her. Questions about the man who created it, about the assumptions she made, about the world she took for granted. As she prepared for bed, those questions all injured, along with the haunting echo of violin strings. In the staff quarters at the edge of the property, Isaiah Bell placed his violin case on a small table in his modest room. He opened it carefully, running his fingers over the instrument that had been his companion through triumph and heartbreak. Tonight, for the first time in 2 years, he had played for an audience again, not by choice but by command. A command from a woman who had seen him as no thing more than a servant until his music forced her to see more. He wasn't sure how to feel about that, about her, about any of it. All he knew was that the music had flowed through him tonight in a way it hadn't in a long time. And as he looked out his window at the mansion glowing in the distance, Isaiah wondered what tomorrow would bring, and whether Eloise Sinclair would look at him differently in the light of day. The morning after the gala, Eloise woke to the sound of her phone buzzing with notifications. The event had been a resounding success, according to the texts and emails flooding in. Several messages specifically mentioned the brilliant violinist, a detail that both pleased and irritated her. She made her way downstairs, where the staff was busy returning the mansion to its usual state. Margaret, her event planner, was checking items off a list in the main hall. There you are. Margaret looked up with a bright smile. Eloise, everyone is talking about last night. The music was inspired. Where did you find him? He works here, Eloise said, accepting a cup of coffee from a passing server. He's the new gardener. Margaret's eyes widened. The gardener? But he plays like he should be on stage somewhere. Apparently he went to Juilliard, Eloise said, trying to sound casual. Listen, do you know anything else about him? About why he's working here instead of with an orchestra? No, but I can find out, Margaret offered, always eager to please. Should I ask around? Eloise hesitated, then shook her head. No, never mind, it's not important. But as she walked through the garden later that morning, she found herself looking for him. The east garden was empty, the hydrangeas he'd been tending to yesterday now perfectly pruned. She continued walking past the rose garden and the vineyard rose, where she finally spotted him. Isaiah was working between the vines, his strong hands checking the grapes with careful attention. He wore simple work clothes today, jeans and a t-shirt that revealed arms muscled from physical labor. His violin case was nowhere to be seen. Eloise approached slowly, suddenly unsure of what to say. He looked up as she neared, straightening to his full height. Ms. Sinclair, he greeted her, his face unreadable. Isaiah. She cleared her throat. I wanted to thank you again for last night. The guests haven't stopped talking about your performance. I'm glad they enjoyed it. An awkward silence fell between them. Eloise found herself searching for words, an unusual experience for someone normally so confident. Gregory Palmer called this morning, she finally said. He wants to introduce you to people at the symphony. I told him I'd give you his number. Isaiah nodded, returning his attention to the vines. Thank you. Is that all you have to say? The words came out sharper than she intended. This could be a huge opportunity. He looked at her again, his dark eyes assessing. What would you like me to say, Ms. Sinclair? That I'm grateful you discovered my talent by accident? That I should thank you for using me as emergency entertainment? His directness caught her off guard. Employees didn't speak to her this way. No one did. That's not fair, she said, her voice rising slightly. I had no idea you could play like that. Because you never asked. The simplicity of his statement made it all the more cutting. You never asked anything about me at all. Eloise felt her cheeks flush with anger and something else, something uncomfortable that felt like guilt. Fine, I'm asking now, she said, crossing her arms. Why is a Juilliard graduate working as a gardener on my estate? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving back to the grapevines. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. Because 2 years ago I lost everything that mattered to me, and after that I couldn't play anymore. He ran his fingers along a vine. Working with growing things, it helped. The quiet, the routine. Being away from the music world. The vulnerability in his admission shifted something in Eloise's chest. But last night you played beautifully. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes, last night I played again. Their eyes met. And for a moment, Eloise felt as though she were truly seeing him for the first time. Not as a gardener or even as a violinist, but as a person with depth she hadn't bothered to notice before. The moment was broken by the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. Eloise turned to see a sleek black car pulling up to the mansion. That's my father, she said, surprised. He wasn't supposed to be back until next week. Isaiah nodded, already turning back to his work. You should go greet him. Eloise hesitated, feeling strangely reluctant to end their conversation. Will you think about Palmer's offer? I will, Isaiah said, not looking up. As she walked back toward the house, Eloise found herself glancing over her shoulder at the man working among the vines. The man whose music had stirred something in her she couldn't quite name. The man she had commanded to perform like a trained pet just yesterday, but who now seemed to occupy a different space in her world entirely. Her father was climbing out of his car as she approached, his distinguished figure impeccably dressed as always. Richard Sinclair, at 60, remained a commanding presence, the founder and CEO of Sinclair Vineyards, respected and feared in equal measure throughout the industry. Daddy! Eloise greeted him with a kiss on the cheek. You're back early. Couldn't miss checking in on how the gala went, he said, his sharp eyes assessing her. I've already received 3 calls about it, all mentioning some violinist who apparently stole the show. Eloise felt a strange protectiveness rise within her. His name is Isaiah Bell. He works for us. Richard raised an eyebrow. A staff member performed at the gala? That's unusual. It was a last-minute solution when the quartet cancelled, Eloise explained as they walked into the house. He was trained at Juilliard. Juilliard. Her father stopped walking. Then what is he doing working here? Eloise thought of Isaiah's words about losing everything that mattered. It's complicated, I think. Richard studied his daughter's face. You seem different today, Eloise. What's going on? Nothing, she said quickly. Just tired from the gala. Her father didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Well, I want to meet this violinist. Gregory Palmer is not easily impressed, and he couldn't stop talking about him. He's working in the vineyard now, Eloise said, feeling strangely reluctant to facilitate this meeting. Then he can take a break, Richard said firmly. Have him come to my office in an hour. As her father walked away, Faise stood in the grand foyer, a sense of unease settling over her. Her father was a businessman above all else, always looking for advantages, for opportunities to expand the Sinclair brand, and now his focus had turned to Isaiah. She thought of Isaiah among the vines, of the peace he seemed to have found there after whatever loss had driven him from music. She thought of his hands, strong and capable, tending to growing things, and she thought of those Amy hands creating music that had brought tears to the eyes of hardened business people. For the first time in her life, Eloise Sinclair found herself wanting to protect someone other than herself. The realization was as startling as the music that had filled her ballroom the night before. Unexpected, confusing, and impossible to ignore. Eloise found Isaiah near the eastern vineyard, kneeling between rows of Cabernet grapes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his broad shoulders as he worked methodically, checking each vine with careful attention. "Isaiah," she called, approaching him. "My father wants to see you." He looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Your father?" "He just returned from Europe. Apparently, Gregory Palmer called him about your performance." Eloise shifted uncomfortably. "He asked to meet with you in his office, in an hour." Isaiah stood, dusting off his hands on his jean cess. "What does he want?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but my father rarely does anything without a purpose." A shadow crossed Isaiah's face. "I see." Eloise found herself wanting to say more, to warn him perhaps, or to apologize for pulling him into the Sinclair world of ambition and advantage, but the words wouldn't come. "You should clean up before you go," she said instead, gesturing to his work clothes. "My father appreciates presentation." Isaiah H's eyes met hers, and she saw in them a flicker of the same intensity that had infused his music the night before. "I know how men like your father work, Ms. Sinclair. This isn't my first experience with wealth and power." The statement hung between them, raising more questions than it answered. Before Eloise could respond, Isaiah nodded briefly. "I'll be there," he said, turning back to the vines. As Eloise walked back to the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to change. Her father's unexpected interest in Isaiah felt dangerous somehow, though she couldn't explain why. An hour later, Richard Sinclair sat behind the massive mahogany desk in his study, reviewing financial reports with a sharp eye. At 60, he remained imposing, silver-haired and distinguished, with the same piercing blue eyes he had passed on to his daughter. A knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Richard called, not looking up from his papers. Isaiah stepped into the office, dressed in clean dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His violin case was clutched in one hand, brought at Richard's request. Richard finally looked up, his gaze assessing the man before him with cool calculation. "Mr. Bell, I presume. Please sit down." Isaiah took the offered seat across from the desk, placing his violin case carefully on the floor beside him. "I understand you made quite an impression at my daughter's gala," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Gregory Palmer is not a man easily impressed." "I was just filling in," Isaiah replied evenly. Richard smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Modesty. Admirable, but unnecessary. I've been told you trained at Juilliard. Yes, sir. Then, I'm curious. What brings a Juilliard graduate to work as a gardener at my estate? Isaiah met the older man's gaze directly. I needed a change. Richard's eyebrow rose slightly at the non-answer. A change? From what exactly? For a moment, Isaiah remained silent, as if weighing his response. From the music world, he finally said. I lost someone important to me. After that, I couldn't play anymore, at least not publicly. Until my daughter forced your hand, Richard observed. A ghost of a smile touched Isaiah's lips. She can be persuasive. Richard laughed, a short, sharp sound. That's one word for it. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Mr. Bell, I'm a businessman. I see opportunities where others see coincidence, and I believe your presence here, your talent, represents an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Isaiah asked, wariness evident in his tone. Sinclair Vineyards has always prided itself on culture, on artistry. We're not just selling wine, Whitbreeze, we're selling an experience. Richard gestured expansively. We've been looking to expand our brand, to create events that showcase both our wines and artistic talent. Your performance last night has given me an idea. Isaiah's expression remained carefully neutral. What kind of idea? A series of exclusive concerts here at the estate. Small, intimate gatherings for our most valuable clients and critics. You would be the centerpiece, the Juilliard-trained violinist who finds our inspiration among our vines. Richard smiled, seeing the future he was crafting. It's a compelling narrative, don't you think? The artist who retreated from the world, playing only for the select few who appreciate both fine wine and fine music. Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. You want to use my personal tragedy as a marketing angle. Richard waved a dismissive hand. I want to give you a platform for your extraordinary talent while benefiting my bussiness, a mutually advantageous arrangement. And if I'm not interested in being a part of your brand? Isaiah's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. Then, of course, you're free to continue as our gardener. Richard's smile thinned slightly. Though I would think performing for appreciative audiences would be preferable to pruning roses. The compensation would be significantly better, I assure you. Before Isaiah could respond, the door to the study opened abruptly. Eloise stood in the doorway, her expression troubled. Daddy, she said, her eyes darting between her father and Isaiah. I need to speak with you. Richard frowned at the interruption. Eloise, we're in the middle of something important. It's about the new distribution contract, she insisted. It can't wait. Richard sighed, then nodded to Isaiah. Think about my offer, Mr. Bell. We'll continue this conversation soon. Isaiah rose, collecting his violin case. He glanced briefly at Eloise as he passed her, his expression unreadable. Once he was gone, Richard turned to his daughter with irritation. There is no urgent distribution contract, is there? Eloise closed the door and faced her father. What are you doing, Daddy? Business, Eloise. Something you should understand by now. He leaned back in his chair. That young man has exceptional talent, and I intend to make a use of it. He's not a marketing tool, she said, surprised by the heat in her own voice. He came here to get away from performing. Richard studied his daughter with narrowed eyes. Since when do you care about the personal feelings of the staff? This isn't like you, Eloise. The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. It wasn't like her. Nothing about her reactions to Isaiah Bell had been like her usual self. I just think we should respect his privacy, she said, trying to sound casual. Not everyone wants to be in the spotlight. Everyone has their price, Richard replied dismissively. And I suspect Mr. Bell's might be lower than most, given his current position. Eloise felt a flare of indignation on Isaiah's behalf. You don't know anything about him. And you do? Her father's gaze sharpened. Eloise, please tell me you're not developing some kind of romantic interest in the gardener. Even if he is talented, it would be beneath you. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, though her cheeks flushed. I'm simply concerned about your tactics. If word got out that you were pressuring employees... Richard held up a hand. I've made him an offer, nothing more. He's free to refuse. His expression softened slightly. Darling, I'm just doing what I've always done. looking for ways to elevate our business. You used to appreciate that. Eloise felt suddenly tired. I know, Daddy. I think there's more to him than you realize. Perhaps? Richard returned to his papers, a clear dismissal. But in my experience, everyone can be reduced to what they want most. We just need to figure out what that is for Mr. Bell. As Eloise left her father's office, she felt unsettled by the conversation. Her father had always been ruthlessly pragmatic about business, using whatever advantages came his way. She had admired that quality, had even emulated it in her own dealings with people. So why did it bother her now? Isaiah stood at the edge of the vineyard, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. His violin case rested against his leg, a familiar weight he had carried with him through triumph and tragedy alike. Richard Sinclair's offer echoed in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to package his talent and sell it, to transform his music into a commodity. 2 years ago, he might have been offended by the suggestion. Now he simply felt tired. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind him interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Eloise approaching, her elegant figure silhouetted against the fading light. "I hope my father wasn't too pushy," she said without preamble. Isaiah couldn't help the slight smile that curved his lips. "Is there another way for him to be?" "Not really," she admitted, coming to stand beside him. "Did he offer you a job as our resident performer?" "Something like that." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the mountains. "You don't have to accept," Eloise finally said. "I know you came here for peace." Isaiah glanced at her, surprised by her perception. "Did I? Why else would a Juilliard graduate choose to work with plants instead of laying on stages around the world?" She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that somehow made her seem younger, more vulnerable. "Something happened to you. Something that made you walk away from music." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me, Ms. Sinclair." "Then tell me," she challenged, turning to face him fully. "You said I never asked. Well, I'm asking now." Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Isaiah looked away, back toward the darkening vineyard. "My wife was a cellist," he said, his voice low and controlled. "We met at Juilliard, performed together for years afterward. We were going to start our own music school." He paused, the weight of memory visible in the set of his shoulders. 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. 6 months later, she was gone. Eloise's breath caught. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "After she died, I couldn't pick up the violin. Every note reminded me of her." His hands clenched at his sides. "So I left New York, left everything. Ended up here working with my hands, with living things. It helped somehow." "Until I forced you to play again," Eloise said, guilt coloring her voice. Isaiah looked at her then, his expression softening slightly. "Yes, until you forced me to play again." "I'm sorry," she repeated, meaning it more than she had meant an apology in a long time. "If I had known, you wouldn't have asked me to perform," he finished for her. "But you didn't know, you didn't ask." The gentle rebuke stung, all the more because it was true. She hadn't bothered to know anything about him beyond his usefulness to her needs. "Did it hurt?" she asked quietly. "Playing again?" Isaiah considered her question for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said, "and no. It was like reopening a wound to let it heal properly." The honesty of his answer touched something in Eloise. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers lightly touching his arm. "Will you play again? For my father's events?" "I don't know," he said, looking down at her hand on his arm. "I came here to escape that world." "What if—" Eloise hesitated, then pushed forward. "What if you played just once more? Not for a crowd, not for my father's business, just for yourself. For the memory of your wife." Isaiah's eyes, dark and questioning, searched her face. "Why do you care, Ms. Sinclair?" It was a fair question, one Eloise wasn't sure she could answer. Why did she care what this man did? Why had his music affected her so deeply? Why was she standing here in the twilight, feeling more genuine concern for his well-being than she had felt for anyone in years. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do." Something shifted in Isaiah's expression, a softening perhaps, or a reassessment. "Eloise," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Why don't you call me Isaiah?" The simple invitation felt monumental somehow. "Isaiah," she repeated softly. He nodded toward the hillside beyond the vineyard. "There's a place up there, a clearing with an old oak tree. The acoustics are surprisingly good." A faint smile touched his lips. "If I were to play again just for myself, that's where I'd go." Eloise understood the unspoken invitation. "When?" "Tomorrow night, after sunset." She nodded, suddenly feeling shy in a way she hadn't since adolescence. "I should get back to the house." As she turned to leave, Isaiah called after her. "Eloise?" She looked back over her shoulder. "Thank you for interrupting my meeting with your father today," he said simply. Eloise smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usual cool beauty into so meething warmer. "You're welcome." As she walked back toward the mansion, she felt lighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eloise Sinclair was thinking about someone other than herself. The next evening, Eloise made excuses to skip dinner with her father and his business associates. She changed from her designer dress into jeans and a simple blouse, clothes she rarely wore, and slipped out of the mansion as the sun was setting. The path to the hilltop clearing wasn't marked, but Isaiah's directions had been clear. As she climbed, Eloise felt a strange nervousness flutter in her stomach. This wasn't like her, sneaking away to meet a gardener, even one with extraordinary talent. What would her friends say if they knew? What would her father say? The thought of her father's disapproval made her steps falter momentarily. Richard Sinclair had definite ideas about what was appropriate for his daughter, about the caliber of people she should associate with. A gardener with a tragic past, no matter how talented, would not meet his standards. For a moment, Eloise considered turning back. Then she remembered the music Isaiah had created at the Gala, music that had touched something long dormant within her. She remembered the quiet dignity with which H.E. had spoken of his loss, without self-pity or drama. She continued climbing. The clearing appeared just as Isaiah had described it, a flat expanse of grass surrounded by ancient oak trees, open to the sky above. The last light of day was fading, giving way to the deep blue of twilight. Stars were beginning to appear overhead. Isaiah was already there, standing beneath the largest oak tree. His violin case lay open on a flat rock nearby. He looked up as he approached, surprise and something else, pleasure perhaps, flickering across his features. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," Eloise replied, suddenly aware of how different she must look in her casual clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of styled in its usual perfect arrangement. Isaiah nodded toward a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. "You can sit there, if you like." Eloise settled on the log, feeling strangely as though she were about to witness something sacred. Isaiah lifted his violin from its case, running his fingers over the wood with a gentleness that spoke of deep connection. He positioned it against his shoulder, raised his bow and then paused, looking at her. "This was her favorite piece," he said quietly. "I haven't played it since she died." Then he began to play. The melody that emerged was unlike anything Eloise had heard at the Gala. Where those pieces had been impressive, technically flawless displays of skill, this was something else entirely. This was raw emotion translated into sound, grief and love and memory woven together into notes that seemed to shimmer in the evening air. Eloise sat motionless, afraid to even breathe too loudly. The music washed over her like waves, each one carrying images she couldn't possibly have seen but somehow knew. A young woman with laughing eyes, two pairs of hands moving in harmony across strings, quiet moments of connection between two people who understood each other completely. As the piece built to its crescendo, Eloise felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. The music demanded honesty, and for once in her life, she gave it freely. When the final note faded into the darkness, neither of them spoke for a long moment. The night insects began their chorus around them, a natural symphony that seemed to honor what had just occurred. Finn ally Isaiah lowered his violin. In the dim light, Eloise could see that his cheeks were wet as well. "Her name was Naomi," he said softly. "She would have liked this place." Eloise rose from the log and moved toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sharing her with me." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Eloise felt something shift between them, a connection forming, fragile but real. "Would you play something else?" she asked. "Something she loved?" Isaiah nodded, lifting his violin once more. This time the melody was gentler, a lullaby of sorts that seemed to cradle the clearing in sound. Eloise closed her eyes, letting the music transport her to places she had never been but somehow recognized. They stayed in the clearing for hours, the night deepening around them. Isaiah played piece after piece, sometimes explaining their significance to Naomi, sometimes letting the music speak for itself. Eloise listened, asked questions, shared bits of herself in return. Her love of art, her complicated relationship with her father, her occasional loneliness despite being surrounded by people. It was the most honest conversation she had ever had. When the moon was high overhead, casting silver light across the clearing, Isaiah finally returned his violin to its case. "It's late," he said. "We should head back." Eloise nodded, though part of her wished they could stay in this magical space where status and expectations didn't matter, where she was just a woman listening to a man share his heart through music. They walked down the hillside together, the path illuminated by moonlight. When they reached the edge of the formal gardens, Isaiah paused. "I'll take the path to the staff quarters," he said, gesturing to a side trail. Eloise hesitated, then impulsively reached for his hand. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly, "for trusting me with your music, with your memories." Isaiah looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. For a moment, Eloise thought he might pull away. Instead, his fingers tightened slightly around hers. "You're not who I thought you were, Eloise Sinclair," he said quietly. She smiled, a touch of her usual confidence returning. "Is that a good thing?" "I'm still deciding," he replied, but the warmth in his eyes belied the teasing words. They stood there for a moment longer, hands linked, neither willing to be the first to let go. Finally, Isaiah gently released her fingers. "Good night, Eloise," he said, stepping back. "Good night, Isaiah," she replied, watching as he turned and headed down the path toward the staff quarters. As she made her way back to the mansion, Eloise felt as though she had awakened from a long sleep. The world-D around her seemed sharper, more vivid, the scent of roses in the garden, the whisper of the breeze through the trees, the distant sound of a nightbird calling to its mate. She slipped in through a side door, hoping to avoid any late-night encounters with her father or the house staff. But as she crossed the main hall, a voice stopped her in her tracks. Well, look what the cat dragged in." Vanessa Whitmore, her oldest friend and occasional rival, lounged on one of the antique sofas in the hall, a glass of wine in her perfectly manicured hand. Her designer outfit and immaculate makeup made Eloise suddenly conscious of her own casual appearance. "Vanessa," Eloise said, recovering quickly, "what are you doing here so late?" "Your father invited me to dinner." Vanessa's eyes traveled over Eloise's jeans and windblown hair. "The question is, where have you been and looking like that?" Eloise felt a flare of the old defensiveness. "I went for a walk to clear my head." "A walk," Vanessa repeated, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word. "Alone?" "Yes, alone," Eloise snapped. "Is that so hard to believe?" Vanessa sipped her wine, her eyes calculating over the rim of the glass. "It is when Thomas just told me he saw you coming down from the hills with that gardener, the violinist from your gala." Eloise's heart sank. Thomas was her father's personal assistant, young, ambitious, and always eager to curry favor with the Sinclair family. If he had seen her with Isaiah and mentioned it to Vanessa, it was only a matter of time before the information reached her father. "We ran into each other on the path," Eloise said, trying to sound casual. "He was heading back to the staff quarters." "With his violin?" Vanessa raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. How convenient. Eloise crossed her arms. What exactly are you implying, Vanessa? Nothing, darling. Vanessa rose gracefully from the sofa. Just looking out for you, as always. You know how people talk. She moved closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Even if he is gorgeous and talented, he's still the help, Eloise. Your father would be furious. The words stung because they echoed Eloise's own earlier thoughts. But after the evening she had shared with Isaiah, they also rang hollow. I don't need you to look out for me, she said coldly. And I certainly don't care what Thomas thinks he saw. Vanessa stepped back, her smile not reaching her eyes. Of course not. You never care what anyone thinks. It's what I've always admired about you. She set down her wine glass. I should go. Early flight to New York tomorrow. As she reached the door, she paused. Oh, by the way, your father mentioned he's planning some kind of concert series featuring your talented gardener. Sounds like quite the marketing opportunity. Her smile turned sharp. I do hope Mr. Bell is prepared for the spotlight again. It can be so revealing. After Vanessa left, Eloise stood in the empty hall, a sense of foreboding settling over her. The magical evening on the hilltop suddenly seemed fragile, threatened by the realities of her world, her father's ambition, Vanessa's gossip, the rigid social boundaries that had defined her life for as long as she could remember. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she could still hear Isaiah's violin, still feel the honesty of the moment they had shared. For the first time, Eloise found herself questioning whether the life she had always taken for granted was truly the one she wanted. As she climbed the grand staircase to her rooms, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would warn Isaiah about her father's plans, about Thomas's observations, about Vanessa's insinuations. Together, they would figure out how to protect the fragile connection that had begun to form between them. What she didn't know was that Richard Sinclair was already several steps ahead of her, making phone calls to old contacts in the music world, seeking information about the talented violinist who had captured his daughter's attention. By morning, everything would change again. Richard Sinclair sat in his study, a glass of his finest Cabernet in one hand, his phone in the other. The call had just ended, but he remained motionless, processing the information he had received. Isaiah Bell, former rising star at Juilliard, husband to the late Naomi Bell, herself a celebrated cellist. Both of them had been on track for illustrious careers until her illness and untimely death. After that, Isaiah had disappeared from the music world entirely, leaving behind not only grief-stricken colleagues, but also an uncompleted recording contract with one of the most prestigious classical labels in the industry. A contract that, according to Richard's contact, remained valid. A contract that gave the label exclusive rights to Isaiah, his first professional recordings he had never completed due to his wife's illness and his subsequent withdrawal from public life. Richard swirled the wine in his glass, considering the implications. If Isaiah were to perform publicly again, if he were to record music as part of the Sinclair Vineyards brand, it could create legal complications, the kind of complications that might be leveraged by a man in Richard's position. He reached for his phone again, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Pinnacle Records. Marcus, he said when the call connected. Richard Sinclair here. I believe we may have a mutual interest to discuss. As he outlined his proposal, Richard glanced at the framed photo on his desk. Eloise at her college graduation, smiling proudly beside him. He had always protected her, guided her, ensured she would inherit a legacy worthy of the Sinclair name. If that meant removing certain distractions from her life, so be it. Outside in the darkened garden, unaware of the conversation taking place inside, Isaiah Bell walked slowly along the paths, his violin case in hand and the memory of Eloise's face in the moonlight fresh in his mind. For the first time since Naomi's death, he felt something stirring within him, something that felt dangerously like hope. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Sinclair mansion, finding Eloise already awake and pacing in her room. She had barely slept, her mind filled with thoughts of Isaiah, of the music they had shared, and of Vanessa's thinly veiled warnings. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her usual morning coffee service. Instead, her father entered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour. His expression was pleasant enough, but Eloise knew him well enough to sense the purpose behind his visit. Window to look out over the vineyard grounds. Beautiful day. The grapes are coming along nicely this season. Eloise waited, knowing her father never engaged in small talk without reason. I had an interesting conversation with Marcus Reynolds last night, he finally said, turning to face her. From Pinnacle Records. Do you remember him? Vaguely, she replied cautiously. What about him? It seems our talented gardener has some unfinished business in the music world. Richard's tone was conversational, but his eyes were sharp. A recording contract he abandoned after his wife's death. Quite valuable, apparently. Eloise felt her chest tighten. How do you know about his wife? I make it my business to know about people who interest me, Richard said simply, especially when they begin to interest my daughter as well. The implication was clear. Eloise lifted her chin. Isaiah and I are just friends, Richard finished for her, his eyebrow raised. Vanessa mentioned you were seen with him last night, looking rather casual. A flash of anger shot through Eloise. You had me followed? Of course not, Richard said dismissively. Thomas happened to see you returning from the hills with Belle and his violin. Eloise said nothing, knowing any defense would only confirm her father's suspicions. Richard moved closer, his voice softening. Darling, I understand the appeal. He's talented, handsome, has that brooding, tragic past, but he's not for you. He touched her shoulder gently. You're a Sinclair. You're meant for more. More than what? Eloise asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. More than someone who feels things deeply. More than someone who creates beauty instead of just buying it. Richard's expression hardened slightly. More than someone who works for us, Eloise. Someone with no prospects, no future beyond what we provide. You don't know anything about him, she said, echoing Isaiah's words to her from days earlier. I know enough. Richard stepped back. I know that he has obligations to Pinnacle Records that he hasn't fulfilled. I know that if he were to begin performing again, for us or anyone else, there could be legal complications. A cold feeling spread through Eloise's chest. What have you done? Nothing yet, Richard S.'d calmly. I've simply made Marcus aware that Belle is playing again. As his contract holder, Pinnacle has certain rights. Rights to what? Eloise demanded. To his music, to recordings, to a percentage of any performance fees. Richard straightened his already perfect tie. Marcus was quite interested to learn where his missing violinist has been hiding. Eloise stared at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The man she had always admired for his business acumen, for his ability to seize opportunities and turn them to advantage, suddenly seemed cold and calculating in a way she had never fully acknowledged before. You're trying to control him, she said slowly, to force him into your marketing plan, or to drive him away entirely. Richard's face remained impassive. I'm protecting our family's interests, and yours. By threatening someone who's already lost everything that mattered to him? Eloise's voice rose slightly. Who came here for peace? Peace doesn't build empires, Eloise. Richard moved toward the door. Belle has talent that belongs legally, partially to Pinnacle. So I'm simply ensuring that all parties are aware of their rights and obligations. He paused at the doorway. Marcus will be visiting next week. I suggest you maintain an appropriate distance from our gardener until then, for everyone's sake. After H.E. left, Eloise sank onto the edge of her bed, hands trembling slightly. Her father had always been ruthless in business, but this felt different. This felt personal. She needed to warn Isaiah. Isaiah was pruning roses in the east garden when Eloise found him. The morning sun highlighted the strength in his shoulders as he worked, his movements precise and focused. He looked up as she approached, a smile starting to form before he caught sight of her expression. What's wrong? He asked immediately, setting down his tools. Eloise glanced around to ensure they were alone. My father knows about your contract with Pinnacle Records, she said without preamble. He's contacted Marcus Reynolds. Isaiah's face went very still. How did he find out about that? He has connections everywhere. Eloise moved closer, lowering her voice. Isaiah, he's trying to use this against you somehow, either to force you to perfo, Drem for his marketing plan, or to make you leave. Because of last night, Isaiah said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Because of us. The word us sent a flutter through Eloise's chest, despite the seriousness of the situation. Someone saw us coming down from the hills, told my father. Isaiah ran a hand over his face. I should have expected this. What exactly is this contract? Eloise asked. Can they really control what you do? Isaiah Sig head, leaning against the garden wall. Before Naomi got sick, we both signed with Pinnacle. They gave us a substantial advance for a series of recordings, classical pieces, but also original compositions we'd been working on together. His eyes grew distant with memory. When she was diagnosed, I asked for time. They granted it, but the contract remained in effect. After she died, I just walked away from all of it. And they can still enforce it? Eloise asked. After all this time? Legally, yes. I never fulfilled the terms, never returned the advance. He met her eyes directly. I didn't care about any of that when I left New York. Money, contracts, career. None of it mattered after Naomi. Eloise felt a wave of protective anger. So my father is using this to manipulate you, to either force you to play for his business, or to make trouble for you if you don't. Or to get rid of me entirely, Isaiah H. added quietly, if I'm a distraction for his daughter. They stood in silence for a moment, the reality of their situation settling between them. What will you do? Eloise finally asked. Isaiah's expression was thoughtful. I could leave, find another quiet place to heal. The thought of him leaving sent a sharp pain through Eloise's chest. Is that what you want? No, he said simply, his dark eyes meeting hers. It's not. The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Then don't go, she said, stepping closer to him. We'll figure this out. Isaiah studied her face, a mixture of wonder and wariness in his expression. Why do you care, Eloise? A week ago I was just the gardener to you. It was a fair question, one she had been asking herself since the night of the gala. Why did this man matter to her? Why had his music touched something so deep within her? Why was she standing here now, defying her father for someone she barely knew? Because when you play, she said slowly, searching for the right W-ords, I feel something I've never felt before. Like you're speaking a language I didn't know I understood. She took a deep breath. And because when I'm with you, I like who I am better than when I'm with anyone else. Isaiah's expression softened. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out to touch her cheek. His fingers were calloused from garden work, but his touch was gentle. Your father won't approve, he said softly. I know, she replied, not moving away from his touch. And you've always cared what he thinks. Eloise smiled faintly. Maybe I'm changing. Isaiah's thumb brushed lightly across her cheekbone. Marcus Reynolds will be coming here to enforce the contract, to either bring me back to New York or extract payment. Then we'll face him together, Eloise said with more confidence than she felt. There must be a way to resolve this that doesn't involve you giving up your peace or being forced into my father's marketing schemes. Isaiah looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. This isn't your battle, Eloise. Maybe it is, she countered. Maybe for once in my life, I want to fight for something that matters instead of just for what benefits me. Before Isaiah could respond, they heard footsteps on the garden path. He dropped his hand from her face and stepped back, just as one of the house staff rounded the corner. Miss Sinclair, the young woman said, clearly flustered to find her employer in close conversation with the gardener. Your father is looking for you. He says it's urgent. Eloise nodded. Tell him I'll be right there. After the staff member left, Eloise turned back to Isaiah. We'll continue this conversation later. Be careful, he warned softly. Your father is a powerful man. So am I, she replied with a flash of her old confidence. He just doesn't know it yet, Ricky. Hard Sinclair was not alone when Eloise entered his study. A man she didn't recognize sat in one of the leather chairs facing her father's desk, middle-aged, expensively dressed, with the sharp eyes of someone constantly assessing value. "Ah, Eloise," Richard greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'd like you to meet James Whitmore, Vanessa's father." James rose, extending his hand. "Lovely to see you again, Eloise. You've grown into quite the beautiful young woman." "Mr. Whitmore," Eloise replied politely, though a sense of unease began to grow. She had met Vanessa's father at various social events over the years, but had never had much interaction with him. His presence in her father's study now seemed oddly significant. "James and I have been discussing a potential partnership," Richard explained, gesturing for Eloise to sit. "The Whitmore hotel chain has been looking to expand into wine country experiences, and Sinclair Vineyards has been considering branching into luxury accommodations." "A natural fit," James added smoothly. "Our companies complement each other perfectly." Eloise looked between the two men, sensing there was more to this meeting than business discussion. "And you need me for this because—" Richard's smile tightened slightly. "James's son, Alexander, has recently joined the family business. Harvard Business School graduate, very promising. You remember Alexander, don't you?" Of course she remembered Alexander Whitmore. Tall, conventionally handsome, and utterly boring, with an inflated sense of his own importance. They had run in the same social circles for years. "Vaguely," she said, not bothering to hide her lack of enthusiasm. "He'll be joining us for dinner tonight," Richard continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Along with James and Vanessa, a chance for our families to become better acquainted as we explore this partnership." The implication was clear. Eloise felt a flash of anger. "I already have plans for tonight." "Cancel them," Richard said flatly. "This dinner is important for our family's future." Eloise met her father's gaze directly. "Our family's future, or your business plans?" James Whitmore cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps I should step out while you two discuss this." "No need," Eloise said, rising. From her chair, "I understand perfectly. I'll be at dinner tonight, of course." She smiled thinly. "I wouldn't want to disappoint anyone." As she turned to leave, Richard called after her. "Eloise, wear the blue Versace. It's Alexander's favorite color." She paused at the door, not turning around. "How would you know Alexander's favorite color, Daddy?" "Vanessa mentioned it," Richard replied smoothly. "Just a helpful suggestion between friends." Eloise left without another word, her mind racing. This wasn't just about business. This was her father's attempt to steer her toward an appropriate relationship with Alexander Whitmore, son of a business ally, from the right social circle, with the right background and connections. Everything Isaiah Bell was not. The dinner that evening was exactly as Eloise had expected. Elegant, proper, and suffocating. She had worn red instead of blue, a small act of défiance NCE that didn't go unnoticed by her father. Alexander Whitmore sat beside her, droning on about his recent business trip to Tokyo, while she pushed food around her plate and smiled at appropriate intervals. "The Japanese have such respect for tradition," Alexander was saying. "Something we seem to be losing here, don't you think?" Eloise murmured non-committally. "Take classical music, for instance," he continued, warming to his topic. "In Japan, it's revered. Here we have people trying to modernize it, mixing it with pop elements." He shook his head disapprovingly. "Some traditions should remain pure." Eloise thought of Isaiah's violin playing, how it had been both technically perfect and emotionally raw, how it had honored tradition while infusing it with personal meaning. Alexander's comments suddenly struck her as not just boring but profoundly wrong. "I disagree," she said, setting down her fork. "Traditions evolve. That's how they stay alive." Alexander looked startled, clearly not used to being contradicted. "Well, I simply meant—" "I know what you meant," Eloise interrupted. "That change is threatening, that boundaries should be maintained." She smiled sweetly. "That people should stay in their proper places." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Vanessa shot Eloise a warning look, while their fathers exchanged glances. "Speaking of music," Richard said smoothly, changing the subject, James, did I mention we're developing a new cultural initiative here at the Vineyard, a series of exclusive concerts? Featuring that gardener who played at Eloise's Gala, Vanessa asked innocently. He was quite impressive. The emphasis she placed on the last word made its double meaning clear. Eloise felt her cheeks flush with anger. Isaiah Bell is a Juilliard-trained violinist, she said, her voice tight. His talent deserves respect. Alexander's eyebrows rose. Isaiah? You're on a first-name basis with the staff now, Eloise? Mr. Bell's arrangements are still being finalized, Richard interjected before Eloise could respond. But yes, we're hoping to feature exceptional talent as part of our brand experience. The conversation moved on, but Eloise remained silent, seething. She caught Vanessa watching her with calculating eyes, clearly aware of the tension she had created and enjoying it. By the time dessert was served, Eloise had reached her limit. She excused herself, claiming a headache, and escaped to the terrace, needing air and solitude. The night was clear. Stars spread across the sky above the dark silhouettes of the Vineyard Hills. In the distance, she could see the faint glow of lights from the staff quarters. Was Isaiah there now? Or perhaps up in the clearing where they had shared music and honesty? Hiding from your admirer? Eloise turned to find Vanessa leaning against the doorway, a glass of wine in her hand and a smirk on her face. I needed some air, Eloise replied coolly. Vanessa moved to stand beside her at the railing. Alexander is quite taken with you, you know, has been for years. How flattering. It should be, Vanessa said, her voice hardening slightly. He's a catch. Harvard-educated, handsome, from the right family. Exactly the kind of man someone like you should be with. Eloise turned to face her oldest friend, suddenly seeing the jealousy and calculation behind the perfect makeup and designer dress. Someone like me? A Sinclair, Vanessa clarified. Vineyard royalty. You have a position to maintain, a legacy to continue. And you think Alexander Whitmore is the one to help me do that? Vanessa sipped her wine. Better than a gardener with a sad story and a violin. Eloise felt a surge of protective anger. You don't know anything about Isaiah. I know he's staff, Eloise. I know he's nobody. Vanessa's perfect features arranged themselves into an expression of concern. I'm saying this as your friend. Whatever little fantasy you're indulging in with him, it needs to stop before you embarrass yourself and your family. My friend, Eloise repeated softly. Is that what you are, Vanessa? Because friends, typical ally, want what's best for each other, not what maintains social hierarchies. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. What's best for you is not throwing away everything you are for some romantic notion about a man who mows your lawn. He doesn't mow the lawn, Eloise said absurdly, latching onto the trivial detail because the rest of Vanessa's statement hit too close to her own doubts. He's a gardener. He tends to living things, helps them grow. Oh, for God's sake, Vanessa rolled her eyes. Listen to yourself. You sound like a lovesick teenager in a bad movie. Perhaps she did, but as Eloise looked out over the vineyard, she realized she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was feeling something real, not the shallow satisfaction of a successful social event or a business deal, but a genuine connection to another human being, to music, to emotions she had kept carefully controlled for as long as she could remember. I think you should go back inside, she said quietly. Tell Alexander I'm not feeling well. Tell my father whatever you want. Vanessa stared at her for a long moment. You're making a mistake, she finally said. And when it all falls apart, when your gardener breaks your heart or runs back to New York or just gets tired of playing the tragic artist, do not come crying to me. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving Eloise alone with the stars and her thoughts. After a few minutes, Eloise made a decision. She slipped off her high heels, gathered the skirt of her evening dress in one hand, and headed down the terrace steps toward the vineyard path. Isaiah sat on the small porch of his staff quarters, his violin beside him. He had been unable to sleep, his mind filled with thoughts of Eloise, of Richard Sinclair's machinations, of Marcus Reynolds, and the contract that still bound him to a past he had tried to leave behind. He had spent the evening alternating between playing, softly so as not to disturb the other staff, and sitting in contemplative silence. The violin felt different in his hands now. Where once it had been too painful to touch, a reminder of all he had lost with Naomi. Now it was becoming something else, a bridge to a new future he hadn't imagined possible. A future that somehow, improbably, involved Eloise Sinclair. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path drew his attention. He looked up to see a figure approaching in the moonlight, a woman in a long dress, her blonde hair gleaming silver in the darkness. "Eloise?" he said, rising to his feet in surprise. She came to a stop at the bottom of his porch steps, slightly out of breath. Her feet were bare, her expensive dress gathered in one hand, her face flushed with exertion and emotion. "I couldn't stay there," she said without preamble. "With them, talking about you like you're just a marketing opportunity or a mistake I'm making." Isaiah moved down the steps to stand before her. "You shouldn't be here. If your father found out—" "I don't care," she interrupted, her blue eyes fierce in the moonlight. "I don't care what he thinks, what Vanessa thinks, what anyone thinks." She took a deep breath. "All my life, I've been exactly what everyone expected me to be, the perfect Sinclair heiress. Cold, controlled, focused on status and appearances." She moved closer to him. "But when you play, Isaiah, when you share your music, your pain, your memories of Naomi, I feel like I'm finally waking up, like I'm learning how to actually feel something real." Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest. He reached out, hesitantly, to touch a strand of her hair that had fallen across her cheek. "Eloise," he said softly, "the S is complicated. Your world and mine are different," she finished for him. "I know, but what if they don't have to be? What if we could create something new, something that doesn't fit into neat categories?" Her earnestness, her vulnerability, so different from the cold, sarcastic woman who had commanded him to play at her gala, moved something deep within him. He had been alone with his grief for so long, had closed himself off from connection, from possibility. But somehow this unlikely woman had breached his defenses. "Your father is bringing Marcus Reynolds here," he reminded her gently, "to enforce a contract I can't fulfill, not the way they want me to." "Then we'll find another way," Eloise insisted. "I have resources, connections. There must be a solution that doesn't require you to choose between your privacy and financial ruin." Isaiah smiled sadly. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," she admitted, "but it's worth fighting for." She reached up, her hand covering his where it still touched her hair. "You're worth fighting for, Isaiah." The world seemed to still around them, the night sounds of the vineyard fading away, the distant lights of the mansion dimming, until there was only this moment, this connection between them. Slowly, Isaiah leaned forward. Eloise rose to meet him, her eyes closing as their lips touched in a kiss that was both tender and electric. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands moved to his shoulders, steadying herself against the rush of emotion. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he whispered. "Yes," she agreed, a smile curving her lips. "I hope it does." They stood together in the moonlight, two people from different worlds finding an unexpected harmony. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the vineyard. Thomas, Richard Sinclair's ever-loyal assistant, his phone already in hand to report what he had witnessed. The next morning, Richard Sinclair sat in his study, his expression thunderous as he listened to Thomas's report. "You're certain?" he asked when the young man had finished speaking. "Yes, sir," Thomas replied nervously. "I saw them myself. Miss Sinclair was at B's quarters until well after midnight." Richard dismissed him with a curt nod, then sat in silence for several minutes, his mind working through various scenarios and solutions. Finally, he reached for his phone and dialed. "Marcus," he said when the call connected, "I need you to come sooner than we discussed. Tomorrow, if possible." He paused, listening to the response. "Yes, it's become somewhat urgent. Bell isn't just playing again. He's becoming a significant distraction." After ending the call, Richard summoned his assistant again. "Thomas, I need you to arrange something for me. Discreetly." As Thomas listened to his instructions, his eyes widened slightly, but he nodded in agreement. "Yes, Mr. Sinclair. I'll take care of it immediately." Eloise woke late the next morning, a sense of lightness filling her that she hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. The memory of Isaiah's kiss, of the connect-ion they had shared, lingered like a sweet melody. She dressed quickly in casual clothes, intending to find him in the gardens. But as she descended the grand staircase, she was surprised to see her father waiting in the foyer, dressed for business despite it being Saturday. "Good morning, Daddy," she said cautiously. Richard's expression was unreadable. "Eloise, I've been waiting for you. We need to talk." Something in his tone set off warning bells. "About what?" "About your future, about this family's legacy." He gestured toward his study. "Please join me, there's someone I'd like you to meet." With a sense of foreboding, Eloise followed her father into his study. A man rose from one of the chairs as they entered, in his 50s, sharply dressed with calculating eyes and a professional smile. "Eloise, this is Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Pinnacle Records," Richard introduced them. "Marcus, my daughter, Eloise. Miss Sinclair," Reynolds greeted her with a nod. "A pleasure." Eloise felt her stomach clench. He wasn't supposed to arrive until next week. "Mr. Reynolds," she replied coolly, "this is unexpected." Marcus was able to rearrange his schedule, Richard explained smoothly, given the urgency of the situation. "What situation is that?" Eloise asked, though she already knew. Richard's eyes hardened slightly. "The situation with Isaiah Bell. Your inner." The way he emphasized the last word made it clear he knew about their growing relationship. Eloise lifted her chin defiantly. "Isaiah is a talented violinist who happens to work as our gardener. I don't see how that concerns Mr. Reynolds." "It concerns me very much," Reynolds interjected, his professional demeanor not quite hiding the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Mr. Bell is under contract to Pinnacle Records, a contract he has failed to fulfill for over 2 years now." "A contract signed when his wife was alive," Eloise countered, "before cancer took her away, before he lost everything that mattered to him." "A tragic story," Reynolds acknowledged without genuine sympathy, "but legally irrelevant. The contract remains binding. Mr. Bell received a substantial advance that was never returned, and he owes Pinnacle a series of recordings." "So what do you want from him?" Eloise demanded. "Money? Music he can no longer create the way you want it?" Reynolds smiled thinly. "What I want, Miss Sinclair, is for Mr. Bell to honor his obligations, one way or another." Richard stepped forward. "Marcus has a proposition that might benefit all parties involved," he said smoothly. "A way for Isaiah to fulfill his contract while also participating in our Vineyard concert series." Eloise looked between the two men, suspicion growing. "What kind of proposition?" "Simple," Reynolds said. "Bell comes back to New York, completes the recordings he owes us, with Pinnacle's selected orchestral backing, following our artistic direction. Once that's done, he'll be free to participate in your father's marketing initiatives here, with Pinnacle taking the standard percentage of performance fees." "And if he refuses?" Eloise asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then we'll be forced to pursue legal remedies," Reynolds said with a shrug. "Recovery of the advance plus interest, damages for breach of contract, potentially an injunction preventing him from performing publicly at all until our contract is satisfied." "You would destroy him," Eloise said quietly. "Take away the music that he's just starting to reconnect with." "Business is business, Miss Sinclair," Reynolds replied. "Surely you understand that, given your family's success." Eloise turned to her father. "And you're facilitating this? Using his contract to control him, to force him away from here, away from me?" Richard's expression softened slightly. "I'm trying to protect you, Eloise. This infatuation with Bell, it's not sustainable. He belongs in a different world." "The world of music," Reynolds added. "The world he ran from after his wife's death. A world waiting for his return." Eloise felt trapped, cornered by these two powerful men who saw Isaiah not as a person healing from devastating loss, but as an asset to be controlled and exploited. "Does Isaiah know you're here?" she asked Reynolds. "Not yet," the record executive replied. "Your father thought it would be best if we spoke to you first, To present a united front, Richard explained, to help you understand the realities of the situation. Eloise laughed bitterly. The reality being that you want Isaiah gone and Mr. Reynolds wants to own his music. I want what's best for you, Richard insisted, for our family. And what about what's best for Isaiah? Eloise challenged. Has either of you considered that? Mr. Bell signed a contract, Reynolds said firmly. He has obligations to fulfill. Eloise looked between them, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the world she had been born into, a world where power and money trumped human feelings, where contracts mattered more than healing, where her father would go to any lengths to maintain control over her life. I want to be there when you speak to him, she said finally, when you present this proposition. Richard and Reynolds exchanged glances. I don't think that's necessary, her father began. It's non-negotiable, Eloise interrupted, a steel in her voice that surprised even her. If you're going to ambush him with this, I want to be present. After a moment's hesitation, Richard nodded. Very well. Thomas is bringing him to the house now. You've already sent for him? Eloise felt a surge of anger. Without even discussing it with me first? Time is valuable, Reynolds said smoothly, and your father assured me you would see reason once the situation was explained. Before Eloise could respond, there was a knock at the study door. Thomas entered, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Bell is here, sir, he announced. Show him in, Richard ordered. As Thomas stepped aside, Isaiah entered the study. He was still in his work clothes, dirt smudging his hands from the morning's gardening. His eyes found Eloise immediately, concern flickering across his features when he saw her tense posture. Mr. Bell, Richard greeted Achim with formal politeness. Thank you for joining us. I believe you know Marcus Reynolds. Isaiah's gaze shifted to the record executive, his expression hardening. Marcus, he said simply. It's been a while. Too long, Isaiah, Reynolds replied with false warmth. The music world has missed you. Isaiah's eyes returned to Eloise. What's going on here? Before she could answer, her father stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds has come to discuss your contract with Pinnacle. It seems you have some outstanding obligations. Isaiah's jaw tightened. I'm aware of what my contract says. Then you're aware that you owe Pinnacle several recordings, Reynolds said. Recordings we've been waiting for over 2 years to receive. My wife died, Isaiah said quietly, his voice tight with controlled emotion. I think that warrants some consideration. And you received it, Reynolds countered. We granted you leave during her illness. We were patient after her passing, but contracts don't dissolve because of personal tragedy, Isaiah. Eloise moved to stand beside Isaiah, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by her father or Reynolds. What exactly are you asking of him? She demanded. Reynolds outlined the proposition again. Isaiah would return to New York, complete the recordings according to Pinnacle's specifications, and only then would he be free to perform, elsewhere with Pinnacle taking their percentage. As he spoke, Eloise watched Isaiah's face, saw the conflict and pain in his eyes. She knew what this would mean for him, returning to the world he had fled, creating music under corporate direction rather than from his heart, leaving behind the peace he had found among the vines, leaving her. When Reynolds finished, Isaiah was silent for a long moment. Finally, he looked directly at Richard Sinclair. "This was your idea," he said. It wasn't a question. Richard didn't deny it. "I saw an opportunity to resolve a complicated situation, to allow you to fulfill your obligations while potentially opening doors for future collaboration." "Future collaboration?" Isaiah repeated. "After you've sent me back to New York, away from your daughter." Richard's expression hardened. "My daughter deserves someone from her world, Mr. Bell, someone who can stand beside her as she inherits the Sinclair legacy." "Someone like Alexander Whitmore?" Eloise interjected bitterly. "Someone with a future," Richard corrected, "not a past they're running from." The words hung in the air, harsh and cutting. Eloise saw Isaiah flinch slightly, though he maintained his composure. "And if I refuse?" he asked Reynolds. "Then we pursue legal remedies," the executive replied matter-of-factly. "Recovery of funds, damages, potentially an injunctio n against any public performances. Isaiah nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already suspected. He turned to Eloise, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. "Alone?" Richard began to object, but Eloise cut him off. "Yes," she said firmly. "We'll use the terrace." Without waiting for her father's permission, she led Isaiah through the French doors that opened from the St. Eudy onto the stone terrace overlooking the vineyard. Once outside, with the doors closed behind them, she turned to him. "Isaiah, I'm so sorry," she began. "I had no idea my father would—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "This isn't your fault." "It is," she insisted. "He's doing this because of me, because of us." Isaiah reached for her hands, holding them in his. "Eloise, your father is a powerful man. He knows how to use leverage to get what he wants. We can fight this," she said desperately. "There must be a way to negotiate with Pinnacle, to fulfill the contract without you having to leave." Isaiah's expression was sad, but resigned. "The contract specifically requires me to record in their New York studios with their producers. That was part of the deal." "For how long?" she asked. "How long would you have to be gone?" "Months at least. Maybe longer." He squeezed her hands gently. "And that's assuming I could even create the music they want now, after everything that's happened." Eloise felt tears threatening but held them back. "So my father wins," she said bitterly. "He separates us, gets you out of the picture." "Is that what you think he's doing?" Isaiah asked. "Of course it is," she replied. "He arranged that dinner with Alexander Whitmore last night. He's been planning this since he found out about us." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, his thumbs tracing small circles on the backs of her hands. "What if he's right?" he finally said, his voice low. "What?" Eloise stared at him in disbelief. "Not about separating us," he clarified quickly, "but about me facing my past, about returning to music on my own terms." He looked out over the vineyard, his expression thoughtful. "I came here to hide, Eloise, to escape the pain of losing Naomi, to escape the expectations of the music world, and for a time, that's what I needed." "And now?" she asked, a knot forming in her chest. His eyes returned to hers, warm and serious. "Now I think maybe I'm ready to play again, really play, not just in private moments, but on my terms, not Pinnacle's, not your father's." "So, you'll go to New York?" Eloise felt her heart sinking. "I have to deal with Pinnacle one way or another," Isaiah said. "The contract exists, it's legally binding, and if I ever want to perform publicly again without legal entanglements, I need to resolve it." Eloise pulled her hands from his, turning away to hide the hurt she knew was visible on her face. "I understand," she said stiffly. "You need to do what's best for your career." Isaiah moved to stand behind her, his hands gently turning her to face him again. "This isn't about my career, Eloise. This is about finding a way forward that honors both my past and my future." His eyes searched hers. "A future that somehow I've started to imagine might include you." The simple honesty of his words made her breath catch. "How?" she asked. "How could it work, with you in New York and me here? With my father opposed to us, with everything so complicated?" "I don't know yet," Isaiah admitted, "but I know that hiding here, avoiding my obligations, avoiding the music world, that's not the answer. Not anymore." He touched her cheek gently. "You helped me see that. When you made me play at your gala, when you listened to me play for Naomi on the hillside, you helped me remember that music isn't just about pain. It's about healing too." Eloise leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "Not when I've just found you." "Then trust me," he said softly. "Trust that I'm not running away from you, but towards something I need to face if we're ever going to have a C. Hans." Inside the study, Richard Sinclair and Marcus Reynolds watched the couple on the terrace, their expressions calculating. "He'll take the deal," Reynolds predicted. "He knows he has no choice." Richard wasn't so certain. Something in the way his daughter stood with the gardener, the intimacy of their conversation, made him uneasy. This was more than the casual infatuation he had initially suspected. "And if he doesn't?" he asked. Reynolds shrugged. "Then we make his life difficult. Legally, professionally. He'll never perform in public again without looking over his shoulder." Richard frowned slightly. He wanted Belle gone, away from his daughter, but the viciousness of Reynolds' approach gave him pause. "Let's see what they decide," he said, turning away from the window. Outside, Isaiah and Eloise had reached a decision of their own. "I'll go to New York," Isaiah said. "I'll talk to Pinnacle, see what can be negotiated. But I won't record music that doesn't feel true to who I am now." "And us?" Eloise asked, the question hanging between them. Isaiah's hands framed her face gently. "This thing between us, it's new, unexpected. I don't know what it is yet, or what it could become." His eyes held hers steadily. "But I know it matters, and I'm not walking away from it." Eloise covered his hands with her own. "I could come with you," she suggested impulsively. "To New York?" Isaiah smiled, touched by the offer but shaking his head. "You have responsibilities here, and this is something I need to face on my own first." His expression grew more serious. "Besides, your father would never allow it." "I don't need his permission," Eloise said, a flash of her old defiance returning. "I'm 26 years old." "But you do need his respect," Isaiah countered gently. "And running away with the gardener isn't the way to gain it." He was right, though she hated to admit it. If she wanted her father to ever accept Isaiah, to see him as more than just staff or a marketing opportunity, she needed to approach this differently. "Then what do we do?" she asked. "I'll go to New York," Isaiah repeated. "I'll face Pinnacle, try to negotiate terms I can live with, and you'll stay here, run the vineyard, show your father that you're still committed to your family's legacy." He took her hands in his once more. "And we'll see where we stand when the dust settles." It wasn't the solution she wanted, but Eloise recognized the wisdom in it. "How long?" she asked. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Weeks at least, maybe months." The thought of months without him, after they had only just begun to know each other, was painful. But Eloise understood that this wasn't just about them. It was about Isaiah reclaiming his music, facing his past, finding a path forward that honored both Naomi's memory and his own talent. "When will you leave?" she asked. "Reynolds will want me to go immediately," Isaiah said. "Probably tomorrow or the next day." So little time. Eloise felt a tightness in her chest at the thought. "Then we have tonight," she said softly. Isaiah nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Tonight," he agreed. They returned to the study, where Richard and Reynolds were waiting expectantly. "I'll go to New York," Isaiah announced without preamble, "to discuss fulfilling my contract obligations. But I have conditions." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, Isaiah." "I'm in a position to negotiate in good faith," Isaiah countered, "or to force you into costly litigation that will delay any recordings indefinitely." The record executive studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Why?" "What conditions?" "I'll record the pieces we agreed to originally," Isaiah said, "but I choose the interpretations, the tempos, the emotional content. No corporate direction on the artistic elements." Reynolds frowned. "That's not how we typically work." "It's how I work," Isaiah replied firmly. "Take it or leave it." Eloise watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Isaiah stood tall, his dignity intact despite being summoned like a servant to this meeting. There was strength in him that she admired, a quiet confidence in his own worth that had nothing to do with status or wealth. Reynolds glanced at Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Fine," the executive said. "Artistic control on interpretation, but we maintain control over production, marketing, distribution." "Agreed," Isaiah said, "and I want to add one original composition to the album, something new." Reynolds eared this, clearly calculating the potential value. "Something marketable." Isaiah's expression remained steady. "Something honest." After a moment, Reynolds nodded. "We'll work out the details in New York. I'll have tickets arranged for tomorrow morning." The day after tomorrow, Isaiah corrected. I need time to prepare to make arrangements here. The executive looked annoyed at the delay, but agreed. Fine. Monday morning. He extended his hand. We have a deal? Isaiah shook it briefly. We have the beginning of one. My lawyer will review the amended contract before I sign anything. Reynolds looked surprised. You have representation now? I will by Monday, Isaiah said with quiet confidence. Richard Sinclair had remained silent throughout the exchange, watching his daughter's reactions as much as the negotiation itself. Now he stepped forward. Well, that seems settled. Marcus, you'll join us for dinner tonight? I'd be delighted, Reynolds replied. I'll have Thomas show you to your guest room, Richard said, effectively dismissing him. Once Reynolds had left with the assistant, Richard turned to Isaiah. I assume you'll need the rest of the day off to prepare for your departure. It was phrased as a gracious offer, but everyone present knew it was really an order to leave the house. Isaiah nodded. Yes, sir. Thank you. He glanced at Eloise, a war LD of unspoken communication passing between them. Miss Sinclair, he said formally for her father's benefit. Thank you for your support. Of course, Mr. Bell, she replied, matching his tone while her eyes told a different story. Safe travels. Once Isaiah had gone, Richard turned to his daughter, his expression unreadable. That went more smoothly than I expected. Did it? Eloise asked coolly. You got what you wanted, Isaiah leaving, though not Q-White on the terms you arranged with Reynolds. I got what's best for everyone, Richard corrected. Bell needs to resolve his contractual obligations if he ever wants a real future in music. You need to focus on your responsibilities here without distractions. And I need my daughter fully committed to the family. Business, not sneaking off to staff quarters in the middle of the night. Eloise felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. So you did have me followed. I didn't need to, Richard replied. This is a small community, Eloise. People talk, staff observe, and fathers notice when their daughters start behaving out of character. He moved closer, his expression softening slightly. I know you think I'm being cruel, that I'm separating you from someone who you care about. But Bell is right about one thing. He needs to face his past before he can have any kind of future with anyone. Eloise wanted to argue, to defend her feelings for Isaiah, to tell her father he had no right to interfere in her personal life. But something held her back. Perhaps the knowledge that in his own calculating way, her father believed he was protecting her. I have work to do, she said instead, moving toward the door. Please give Mr. Reynolds my regrets for dinner. I won't be joining you. Eloise, Richard called after her, don't do anything impulsive. Bell has made his decision. Respect it. She paused at the door, not turning around. I always respect Isaiah's decisions, Daddy. It's yours I'm questioning. With that, she left, her mind already racing with plans for the evening ahead, the last night before Isaiah would leave for New York. Their last chance to determine if what had begun between them was strong enough to survive separation, distance, and her father's disapproval. Night fell over Sinclair Vineyards, the hills turning silver in the moonlight. In the grand dining room of the mansion, Richard Sinclair entertained Marcus Reynolds, discussing contract details and marketing possibilities. Vanessa and Alexander Whitmore had joined them, completing the picture of the social circle Richard deemed appropriate for his daughter. Eloise was nowhere to be seen. She had left the house hours earlier, dressed simply in jeans and a light sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Now she sat beside Isaiah on the familiar hillside clearing, a blanket spread beneath them, a small basket of food and wine between them. They had talked for hours, about his plans for New York, about her responsibilities at the vineyard, about the complications they would face moving forward. Their eye had shared memories, Isaiah telling stories of Naomi that made him smile instead of only bringing pain, Eloise recounting rare happy moments from her controlled childhood. As the night deepened, Isaiah had played for her one last time, a piece he had begun composing in his head since their first evening together on this hillside. It wasn't finished yet, he explained. Like their story, it was still evolving, still finding its path. Now they sat in comfortable silence, Eloise leaning against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The stars spread overhead in a vast tapestry, witnesses to the unexpected connection between the vineyard heiress and the gardener with a violin. I'll write to you, Eloise said, breaking the silence. Every day. Isaiah smiled against her hair. Email exists, you know. Even phone calls. Letters are more romantic, she insisted. More permanent. He chuckled softly. I never would have taken you for a romantic, Eloise Sinclair. I never was, she admitted. Until you. Isaiah turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. I can't promise how this will end, he said softly. I don't know what will happen in New York, or if your father will ever accept me as more than just an employee. I don't need promises, Eloise replied, reaching up to touch his face. I just need you to come back, when you're ready, when you've made your peace with Pinnacle and with your past. And if your father has other plans for you in the meantime, Isaiah asked, his voice carefully neutral. If Alexander Whitmore comes calling with your father's blessing? Eloise smiled, a confident expression that reminded him of the woman he had first met, proud, certain of her own mind. Then Alexander Whitmore will be very disappointed, she said simply. I've spent my whole life being what others expected. I'm done with that now. Isaiah's hand came up to cover hers, where it rested against his cheek. Naomi would have liked you, he said softly. She always said I needed someone who would challenge me, not just support me. The mention of his late wife didn't bring pain as it once would have. Instead, it felt like a blessing of sorts, an acknowledgement that love didn't have to be erased to make room for new beginnings. I wish I could have known her, Eloise said sincerely. In a way, you do, Isaiah replied. Through the music, through the parts of me she helped shape. They stayed on the hillside until the moon began its descent, reluctant to end their last night together. Finally, as the eastern sky hinted at the coming dawn, they gathered their things and made their way down the path toward the estate. At the junction where the path split, one way leading to the mansion, the other to the Taff quarters, they stopped, facing each other in the fading darkness. I'll drive you to the airport on Monday, Eloise said. Isaiah shook his head gently. Your father would see it as defiance, as a statement. Maybe that's what I want it to be, she countered. We don't need grand gestures or public statements, Isaiah said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. What's between us is ours, not a performance for others to judge. Eloise nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. Then I'll say goodbye here, she said, her voice catching slightly. Now. Isaiah drew her close, his arms encircling her. Not goodbye, he corrected softly. Just until we meet again. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with the knowledge of separation ahead. When they finally parted, Eloise felt tears on her cheeks, but didn't try to hide them. Play for me, she whispered, wherever you are, and I'll hear it. Somehow. Isaiah pressed his forehead to hers. I'll play for us both, he promised, for what was and what might be. With one last touch of his hand against her face, he turned and walked down the path toward the staff quarters. Eloise watched until his figure disappeared into the shadows, then made her way back to the mansion, her heart both heavy with parting and light with possibility. In her father's study, Richard Sinclair stood at the window, watching his daughter return from her night with the gardener. His expression was troubled, conflicted. For the first time he wondered if he had miscalculated, if what existed between Eloise and Isaiah Bell was more than the infatuation he had dismissed it as. But it was too late for doubt now. The wheels were in motion. Bell would leave for New York, fulfill his contract with Pinnacle, and perhaps find his way back to the music world where he belonged. Eloise would remain here, would eventually see the wisdom in her father's intervention, would return to the path he had always envisioned for her. At least that was what Richard told himself as he turned away from the window, not wanting to see the tears that gleamed on his daughter's face in the first light of dawn. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Isaiah packed his few belongings, carefully placing his violin in its case. He had spent Sunday completing his gardening duties, ensuring the plants he had tended would be properly cared for in his absence. He had not seen Eloise since their night on the hillside. They had agreed it would be easier this way. No public farewell, no chance for her father or others to witness their parting. Instead, they would carry the memory of that night, of promises whispered under stars, to sustain them during their separation. A car was waiting to take him to the airport, arranged by Reynolds, no doubt. Isaiah took one last look at the small room that had been his sanctuary for the past year, then picked up his violin case and single suitcase and walked out the door. To his surprise, Richard Sinclair was waiting beside the car, his expression unreadable in the morning light. "Mr. Bell," he greeted him formally, "I thought I should see you off personally." Isaiah set down his luggage, facing the older man directly. "Mr. Sinclair." "I want to be clear about something," Richard said without preamble. "My concern has always been for my daughter's well-being, for her future." "As has mine," Isaiah replied simply. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly at the calm assertion. "You barely know her." "I know enough," Isaiah said. "I know she's stronger than you give her credit for, more independent than you want her to be, more capable of making her own choices than you've ever allowed." Words hung between them, a challenge that Richard couldn't entirely dismiss. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "Perhaps. But she's still a Sinclair. This estate, this business, it's her birthright, her responsibility." "A responsibility she takes seriously," Isaiah acknowledged, "one she would never abandon." "Then we understand each other," Richard said, extending his hand. "Safe travels, Mr. Bell." Isaiah accepted the handshake, his grip firm. "I'll be seeing you again, Mr. Sinclair." It wasn't a question or a request, it was a statement of fact. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, but he made no comment as Isaiah loaded his luggage into the car and climbed inside. As the car pulled away, Isaiah looked back at the Sinclair estate, the rolling vineyard hills, the manicured gardens, the imposing mansion on the rise. Somewhere within those walls was Eloise, the woman who had commanded him to play for Gala, and in doing so, had unknowingly begun to heal wounds he thought would never close. He would return, he promised himself, not as the gardener, not as the broken man hiding from his past, but as himself, Isaiah Bell, violinist, a man who had loved and lost and found the courage to love again. In her room at the top of the mansion, Eloise stood at the window, watching the car disappear down the long driveway. She had seen her father's unexpected appearance, had watched the exchange between the two men with a mixture of anxiety and hope. As the car vanished from sight, she didn't allow herself to cry. Instead, she turned to her desk where a stack of stationery waited. She had promised Isaiah letters, and the first one would leave today. "Dear Isaiah," she began, her pen moving across the creamy paper, "today you return to the world you left behind. I find myself wondering what awaits you there. What memories, what challenges, what opportunities. But whatever you find, know that here, among the vines where we first truly saw each other, someone is waiting for your return." She continued writing, pouring out her thoughts and feelings with an honesty that surprised her. When she had finished, she sealed the letter in an envelope, addressing it to the hotel in New York where Isaiah would be staying initially. As she placed the letter in her outgoing mail tray, Eloise felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The separation ahead would be difficult, the obstacles many. Her father would continue to push her toward what he considered suitable matches. Vanessa would spread gossip. The social world she had always moved in would question her choices. But for the first time in her life, Eloise Sinclair knew exactly what she wanted, and she was prepared to fight for it. Across the country, as his plane rose, into the clouds, Isaiah Bell closed his eyes, his fingers moving in silent patterns against his armrest, playing an invisible violin, composing a new piece in his mind. A piece about unexpected connections, about music found in unlikely places, about the hope that grows like vines in fertile soil. A piece about Eloise and the future they might build together. 1 year had passed since Isaiah Bell had left Sinclair Vineyards. 1 year of letters exchange, of phone calls that stretched late into the night, of changes neither could have anticipated when they'd said their farewells in the pre-dawn light of that hillside clearing. Eloise Sinclair stood on the terrace of the mansion, overlooking the estate as workers transformed the grounds for tonight's annual harvest gala. Crystal chandeliers were being hung from the branches of ancient oak trees, white linen tables arranged across the lawn, a temporary stag erected near the rose garden. At 27, Eloise looked different than she had a year ago. Her blonde hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders in soft waves rather than the severe style she had once favored. Her clothing remained elegant but had softened somehow, designer dresses giving way more often to simple, well-cut outfits that spoke of confidence rather than status. But the greatest changes weren't visible from the outside. They were internal, shifts in perspective, in priorities, in the way she viewed her world and her place in it. "Ms. Sinclair?" The event coordinator approached, clipboard in hand. "The florists need your final approval on the table arrangements. I'll be right there," Eloise replied with a smile that came more easily these days. As she moved through the busy preparations, checking details and making decisions, Eloise thought about how much had changed in a year. The vineyard was flourishing under her increased involvement, new sustainable growing practices implemented, relationships with local businesses strengthened, the Sinclair brand evolving in subtle but significant ways. Her father had been skeptical at first, resistant to her more active role in operations. But as sales improved and critical acclaim grew for their latest vintages, even Richard Sinclair had to acknowledge his daughter's business Einstein CTs. Their relationship remained complicated, strained by the unspoken presence of Isaiah in Eloise's life, by Richard's continued efforts to introduce her to suitable men from their social circle, by their different visions for the future of Sinclair Vineyards. But they had reached a kind of truce, a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. "The stage lights need adjusting," Eloise told the technical crew as she passed. "We want soft illumination, nothing harsh." "Yes, Ms. Sinclair," the lead technician nodded. "We'll make sure it's perfect for tonight's performance." The performance. Eloise felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach at the thought. After a year of waiting, of patience and persistence, tonight everything would change again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a message from Vanessa. "Heard the big news, bold move, Eloise, call me." Eloise slipped the phone back, Kay without responding. Her friendship with Vanessa had cooled significantly over the past year, the other woman's gossip and social manipulations increasingly transparent after Eloise's eyes had been opened to a different way of connecting with people. They still moved in the same circles, attended the same events, maintained the appearance of friendship. But Eloise no longer shared her thoughts or feelings with the woman who had tried to undermine her relationship with Isaiah from the beginning. Mrs. Sinclair, Thomas, her father's assistant, approached with his usual deferential manner. "Your father would like to see you in his study when you have a moment." Eloise nodded, unsurprised. "Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes, after I finish with the florists." As Thomas walked away, Eloise took a deep breath, steadying herself for the conversation ahead. Her father would make one last attempt to change her mind about tonight's plans. She was certain of it. But her decision had been made long ago, in those first weeks after Isaiah's departure, when she had realized that the path forward would require courage and conviction from them both. Richard Sinclair stood at the window of his study, watching the transformation of the grounds below. At 61, he remained an imposing figure, successful, powerful, accustomed to having his will obeyed. But the past year had forced him to recognize that some things remained beyond his control. Chief among them, his daughter's heart. The door opened, and Eloise entered. "You wanted to see me, Daddy?" Richard turned from the window. "The preparations look impressive," he commented. "You've outdone yourself this year." "Thank you," she said, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs. "The ticket sales have already raised twice what we expected for the Children's Music Education Fund." Richard nodded, moving to sit behind his desk. "A worthy cause," he acknowledged, "though an unexpected one for us to champion." "Not so unexpected," Eloise replied with a small smile. "Not anymore." Her father studied her for a moment, noting the quiet confidence in her posture, the subtle changes in her appearance, the woman she had become during this year of transition. "I received a call from Marcus Reynolds this morning," he said, final lie, confirming his attendance tonight. "I'm not surprised," Eloise said calmly. "The release of Isaiah's album has been quite the success story in the industry. Pinnacle is enjoying the prestige." "And the profits," Richard added dryly. It had been the unexpected twist in the story. Isaiah's negotiated contract with Pinnacle had resulted in an album that defied the record company's commercial expectations. Instead of the safely marketable classical reco ardings they had initially demanded, Isaiah had produced something unique. Traditional pieces reinterpreted through the lens of personal loss and renewal, paired with original compositions that critics had called revolutionary and deeply moving. The album, titled simply Return, had debuted at the top of the classical charts and crossed over into mainstream success in a way no one at Pinnacle had anticipated. Suddenly, Isaiah Bell was no longer just a talented violinist with an unfulfilled contract. He was an artist whose authentic voice had resonated with listeners around the world. Reynolds mentioned they're eager to sign him for a follow-up, Richard continued, watching his daughter's reaction carefully. A world tour is being discussed. Eloise met her father's gaze steadily. Isaiah will make the right decision for his music and his future. And what about your future, Eloise? Richard asked, the question they had circled around for months, finally spoken aloud. What about Sinclair Vineyards, the legacy you were born to continue? The vineyard is my home, she replied without hesitation. My heritage, that hasn't changed. But your plans for it have, Richard pointed out. This partnership with the Music Education Foundation, the concert series you've proposed, the artist residency program, these weren't part of our business model. They are now, Eloise said simply. And they're working, Daddy. Our wine club membership has increased 40% since we started hosting the monthly concert series. Tourism is up. Even our traditional business partners are impressed with the direction we're taking. Richard couldn't argue with the numbers. The Sinclair brand had indeed benefited from his daughter's innovations, from the careful way she had begun integrating culture and commerce. But that wasn't his real concern. And what happens after tonight? He asked directly. When Bell returns, not just for a performance but to stay, have you considered how your relationship with him will affect your position here? How it will be perceived by our social circle, our business associates? Eloise had expected this question. Times change, Daddy. So do perceptions. Isaiah isn't just a gardener anymore. He's one of the most respected classical artists of his generation. Even your friends have his album. That doesn't change where he came from, Richard insisted, or the fact that he once worked for us. No, Eloise agreed, and I wouldn't want it to. Isaiah's journey is part of who he is. The loss he overcame, the peace he found here among our vines, the music he rediscovered. She leaned forward slightly. Just as my journey is part of who I am, including the woman I was before I met him, and the woman I've become since. Richard was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He spoke again, his voice was quieter. You love him? It wasn't a question, but Eloise answered anyway. Yes, I do. Enough to risk everything, Richard pressed. Your position here, your social standing, the future I've always planned for you. Eloise smiled, a gentle expression that held no defiance, only certainty. I'm not risking everything, Daddy. I'm choosing a future that includes both my heritage and my heart. She stood, moving to the window. Fautu, look out at the estate. Sinclair Vineyards will always be part of me, but it doesn't have to be all of me. Richard joined her at the window, following her gaze across the rolling hills covered with orderly rows of grapevines to the distant mountains beyond. This land had been in his family for generations, had been his life's work to expand and improve. He had always assumed his daughter shared his singular focus on the business, his definition of success. But watching her over the past year, seeing her grow into a leader with her own vision, her own strength, had slowly changed something in him. Pride had begun to replace disappointment. Respect had started to overshadow disapproval. He makes you happy, Richard said finally. Not a question this time either. He does, Eloise confirmed. But so does this place. So does building something meaningful here. She turned to face her father directly. I don't have to choose between them, Daddy, and I won't. The quiet determination in her voice reminded Richard so much of her mother. The same clear-eyed certainty, the same gentle strength that brooked no argument. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to see those similarities, to remember the woman he had loved and lost too young. "Then I suppose we should make sure tonight's gala is a success," he said after a long moment. "It seems we have more than the harvest to celebrate." Eloise's eyes widened slightly at the implicit acceptance in his words. "Does that mean you'll welcome him? Truly welcome him?" Richard sighed, the sound of a man acknowledging that some battles weren't worth fighting. "It means I'll try, Eloise, for your sake." It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was more than she had expected. Impulsively, Eloise reached out to hug her father, a gesture that had become rare between them in recent years. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. Richard's arms closed around his daughter awkwardly at first, then with genuine affection. "He'd better be as good as everyone says," he muttered gruffly. "Or I'll still have something to say about it." Eloise laughed as she stepped back. "Just wait until tonight, you'll see." Evening descended on Sinclair Vineyards, transforming the estate into a wonderland of light and music. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the paths between the vines, leading guests from the parking area to the grand lawn, where tables draped in white linen surrounded a wooden dance floor. The stage at one end of the lawn was simply decorated, awaiting the night's entertainment. Eloise stood at the entrance to the terrace, greeting guests as they arrived. Her gown was simpler than in years past, a deep green silk that complemented her eyes, elegant without being ostentatious. Around her neck hung a small pendant made from a grapevine tendril cast in silver, a gift from Isaiah, sent from New York months ago, with a letter explaining that it reminded him of how things can grow in unexpected directions, finding strength in their twists and turns. "Eloise, darling." Vanessa Whitmore air-kissed her cheeks as she arrived with her brother Alexander in tow. "The place looks absolutely magical, though I heard the most interesting rumor about tonight's entertainment." "Did you?" Eloise replied with a pleasant smile. "I'm afraid you'll have to wait like everyone else to find out." Alexander stepped forward, handsome in his tuxedo, but wearing the slightly petulant expression of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I was hoping we might have a moment to talk later, Eloise, about that investment opportunity I mentioned last month." "Of course," Eloise said smoothly, "though tonight is about celebration, not business. Please enjoy yourselves." As they moved into the crowd, Eloise caught the calculating look Vanessa threw over her shoulder. News of tonight's special guest had clearly reached the Whitmore siblings, along with the implications for Eloise's relationship status. More guests arrived, wine critics, local business owners, wealthy collectors, and social elites from San Francisco and beyond. Each was greeted personally, made to feel welcome, incorporated into the Sinclair experience that Eloise had carefully crafted. Richard joined his daughter at the entrance, impeccable in his tuxedo. "Impressive turnout," he commented. "The governor just arrived." "And 3 major wine publications have sent critics," Eloise added, "plus the arts editor from the Chronicle." "For the wine or for Belle?" Richard asked with a raised eyebrow. "Both," Eloise replied. "That's the point of tonight. Bar-inging together what matters to us." Richard studied his daughter's face, noting the anticipation in her eyes as she glanced toward the estate entrance. "He's cutting it close, isn't he?" Eloise checked her watch. "His flight was delayed, but he'll be here." The certainty in her voice was absolute. After a year of separation and reunion, of building trust through distance and dedication, Eloise knew without doubt that Isaiah would never disappoint her if it was within his power to prevent it. "Ms. Sinclair." Thomas appeared at her elbow, professional as always. "The caterers are ready to begin service and the musicians for the dinner portion are in place." "Thank you, Thomas," Eloise said. "Let's get started then. We'll adjust the schedule as needed." As they moved to take their places at the head table, Eloise felt her phone vibrate in the small clutch she carried. She glanced at the screen to find a message from Isaiah. "Just arrived, getting changed. Save me a dance." Relief and joy flowed through her. She tucked the phone away, smiling to herself as she took her seat beside her father. The dinner portion of the gala proceeded smoothly. Excellent food paired with Sinclair's finest wines, conversation flowing around tables illuminated by candlelight and the glow of lanterns. A string quartet played soft background music, nothing that would compete with the main performance to come. As dessert was being served, Richard Sinclair rose from his seat, tapping a spoon against his crystal wine glass. The crowd fell silent, attention turning to their host. "Distinguished guests, friends and colleagues," he began with practiced ease. "Welcome to the annual Sinclair Vineyards Harvest Gala. This year marks our 30th celebration of the bounty these hills provide." He gestured to the vineyards surrounding them, moonlight silvering the rows of grapevines. "But tonight is special for another reason. For the first time, the gala is supporting a cause beyond our business. The establishment of the Naomi Bell Foundation for Children is Music Education." A murmur ran through the crowd at the unfamiliar name. Eloise felt a rush of emotion, thinking of the long conversations with Isaiah over the past year, of his desire to honor Naomi's memory by creating opportunities for children who might not otherwise have access to music. "This foundation," Richard continued, surprising Eloise with the genuine warmth in his voice, "will provide instruments, instruction, and inspiration to underprivileged children throughout California. A chance for young people to discover the transformative power of music, regardless of their circumstances." He turned slightly to acknowledge Eloise. "My daughter has been instrumental in forming this partnership between Sinclair Vineyards and the Foundation. Her vision for combining our traditional values with new purpose has proven both financially sound and personally rewarding." The pride in her father's voice was unmistakable. Eloise felt tears threatening and blinked them back, moved by this public acknowledgement of her work, of the changes she had championed over the past year. "And now," Richard said, his gaze moving to the back of the gathering, "it is my honor to introduce the artist whose work has inspired this initiative, whose music has touched hearts around the world this past year. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to our stage, Isaiah Bell." Applause erupted as Isaiah appeared at the edge of the crowd. He looked nothing like the gardener who had reluctantly performed at last year's gala. Tonight, he wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his bearing confident yet humble as he made his way toward the stage. His eyes found Eloise immediately, a private smile passing between them before he acknowledged the applause with a gracious nod. He carried his violin case, the same worn leather case he had brought to the gardens each day during his time at the estate. As Isaiah took the stage, adjusting the microphone, Eloise was struck by how much had changed, and yet how much remained the same. The essential quality that had drawn her to him was still there, the quiet dignity, the emotional honesty, the deep connection to his music. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair, for that kind introduction," Isaiah said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering. "And thank you all for supporting the Naomi Bell Foundation tonight." He opened his violin case, removing the instrument with the same care and reverence Eloise remembered from that first command performance. "Some of you may remember me from last year's gala when I was employed here as a gardener," he continued with a small smile. "Life takes unexpected turns sometimes." A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. "Tonight I'd like to play something new for you," Isaiah said, positioning the violin against his shoulder. "It's called The Music Beneath the Thorns, and it's dedicated to someone who helped me find my way back to MUSIC when I thought it was lost forever." His eyes met Eloise's across the crowd, the connection between them palpable. Then he raised his bow and began to play. The melody that emerged was unlike anything Eloise had heard before, not even on the album that had brought Isaiah international acclaim. This was something new, something created just for this moment. It began softly, with a hint of melancholy that spoke of loss and loneliness, but gradually it transformed, growing in complexity and emotion, weaving themes of discovery, connection, and finally, joyful return. The audience sat transfixed as Isaiah played, his body swaying slightly with the music, his eyes sometimes closed, sometimes finding Eloise as if drawing inspiration from her presence. The piece built to a crescendo that seemed to fill the night air with hope and possibility, before gentling into a final refrain that echoed the opening notes, beauty with a warmth and richness that spoke of healing completed. As the final note faded into the night, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the crowd rose to their feet as one, applause thundering across the vineyard. Isaiah acknowledged the standing ovation with a humble bow, his eyes never leaving Eloise's face. She stood with the others, unashamed of the tears that slipped down her cheeks. In Isaiah's music, she had heard their story, the Initia L conflict, the connection that grew despite obstacles, the pain of separation, and the joy of reunion. Isaiah played several more pieces, some from his album, others chosen specifically for the occasion. Each was met with enthusiastic appreciation from the crowd, many of whom had come specifically to hear the artist whose rise from obscurity to acclaim had been one of the music world's most compelling stories of the year. When he finally set aside his violin, the stage lights dimmed and the dance floor was opened. The hired band began playing, and couples moved onto the wooden floor beneath the stars. Isaiah made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and compliments, but his destination was clear. He reached Eloise where she stood at the edge of the dance floor, her eyes shining with pride and love. "You came," she said softly, though she had never doubted he would. "I promised I would," H.E. replied, taking her hand in his. "May I have this dance, Miss Sinclair?" Eloise smiled, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. "Always, Mr. Bell." As they moved together to the music, the crowd around them seemed to fade away. Isaiah held her close, his cheek against her hair. "Your father's introduction was unexpected," he murmured. "He's trying," Eloise said. "It's more than I hoped for." "And the foundation? Naming it for Naomi?" Isaiah's voice held wonder and gratitude. "That was your doing, wasn't it?" Eloise nodded against his shoulder. "It seemed right. A way to honor what came before, while building something new." Isaiah drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Eloise Sinclair." "Good," she replied with a smile. "I plan to keep doing that for a very long time." They danced in comfortable silence for a moment, content to be together after months of separation. Tholi. They had seen each other during Isaiah's brief visits between recording sessions and performances. This night marked something different, a public acknowledgement of what had been growing between them, a declaration of intent for the future. "Have you decided," Eloise asked finally, "about the tour Pinnacle is proposing?" Isaiah nodded. "I've agreed to a limited schedule, 20 cities, not the 40 they wanted, and with conditions." "What conditions?" she asked, though she suspected she knew. "That I have time between performances to work on new compositions, that I retain full artistic control," he smiled down at her, "and that I have a home base to return to between tours, a place where I can work with the foundation, mentor young musicians, and be with the woman I love." Eloise's heart swelled at his words. "I think that can be arranged," she said softly. "In fact, I've been working on something that might interest you." Before she could elaborate, they were interrupted by the approach of Marcus Reynolds. The record executive looked pleased with himself, champagne glass in hand. "Isaiah, magnificent performance," he said expansively. The crowd loved it. "This is exactly the kind of exposure we need leading up to the tour announcement." Isaiah's arm remained around Eloise's waist. "Marcus," he greeted the executive, "I'm glad you could make it." "Wouldn't have missed it," Reynolds replied, his gaze moving to Eloise. "Miss Sinclair, a pleasure to see you again. I must say, your relationship with our star artist has worked out rather advantageously for all concerned." The calculating assessment in his tone made Eloise bristle internally, but she kept her expression pleasant. "The only advantage I'm concerned with, Mr. Reynolds, is the one the foundation will provide to children who deserve access to music education." Reynolds had the grace to look slightly abashed. Of course, a worthy cause. He turned back to Isaiah. "We should discuss the contract amendments tomorrow. My office has some concerns about the scheduling limitations you've proposed." "Tomorrow is Sunday," Isaiah pointed out mildly, "and I'll be busy with foundation matters. Monday would be better." The subtle but clear boundary setting was new. A year ago, Isaiah might have acquiesced to the executive's demands. Now he stood his ground, comfortable in his own worth, no longer desperate or beholden. Reynolds looked momentarily annoyed but recovered quickly. "Monday then. I'll have my assistant set it up." He nodded to them both before moving away, already scanning the crowd for other important connections to make. "That was new?" Eloise commented once Reynolds was out of earshot. Isaiah smiled slightly. "I've learned a few things this year, about music, about Business, about what matters and what doesn't. And what matters, she asked, though she knew the answer. This, he said simply, his hand tightening around hers. Us, the foundation. Creating music that means something, not just that sells. The honesty in his voice, the clarity of his priorities. These were the qualities that had drawn Eloise to him from the beginning, even when she hadn't recognized their value. Before she could respond, Richard Sinclair approached them, his expression carefully neutral. "Belle," he greeted Isaiah with a nod. "Impressive performance." "Thank you, sir," Isaiah replied, "and thank you for your support of the foundation. It means a great deal." Richard glanced at his daughter, noting her closeness to Isaiah, the protective way the younger man kept his hand at the small of her back. "Eloise has been quite persuasive about its merits," he said dryly. "Daddy," Eloise interjected gently, "I was just about to tell Isaiah about the cottage." Richard's eyebrow rose slightly. "Ah, the cottage. Yes, perhaps this is a good time." Isaiah looked between them, curiosity evident in his expression. "What cottage?" Eloise exchanged a glance with her father before explaining. "There's a small property at the eastern edge of the estate, a caretaker's cottage that hasn't been used in years. I've had it renovated over the past few months." "Renovated?" Isaiah echoed. "It has excellent acoustics," Richard added unexpectedly. "According to the architects Eloise consulted. Something about the ceiling design and the materials used." Understanding dawned in Isaiah's eyes. A place to compose, to practice. Eloise nodded. "And to live when you're not touring. It's private, peaceful, but still connected to the estate." She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "If you want it, that is." Isaiah looked at her father. "And you're comfortable with this arrangement, Mr. Sinclair?" Richard studied the younger man for a long moment, assessing him not as the gardener he had once been, but as the man his daughter had chosen. "I've learned that fighting certain battles only ensures I'll lose them," he said finally, "and that my daughter's happiness is worth more than my pride." It wasn't a warm endorsement, but it was honest, and more acceptance than either Eloise or Isaiah had expected. "Thank you, sir," Isaiah said simply. Richard nodded, then turned to his daughter. "The governor is leaving. We should thank him for coming." As her father walked away, Eloise turned back to Isaiah. "It's not the main house," she said softly, "but it's a beginning, a place for you to create, to be yourself." "To be with you," Isaiah added, understanding the unspoken parts of her offer. "Whenever I'm not on the road." Eloise nodded, a question in her eyes. "Is it enough for now?" Isaiah's hand came up to touch the vineyard tendril pendant at her throat. "It's more than enough," he assured her. "It's everything I never thought I'd find again after Naomi died. Purpose, music, connection." His eyes held hers, filled with certainty. "Love." The simple declaration warmed Eloise from within. "I do love you," she whispered. "More than I thought possible when I ordered you to play at last year's Gala." Isaiah smiled at the memory. "You were rather imperious about it," he teased. "I was horrible," she corrected him. "Entitled, dismissive." "And now?" he asked, his hands spanning her waist as they swayed to the music. "Now I'm still entitled," she admitted with a small smile, "but working on it, and I hope never dismissive of what matters." Isaiah laughed softly, the sound of genuine happiness. "We've both changed," he acknowledged. "And yet, the essential parts remain." Around them the gala continued, guests dancing beneath the stars, servers circulating with champagne, the night air filled with music and conversation. Eloise caught glimpses of familiar faces, her father deep in discussion with a wine critic, Vanessa watching them from across the dance floor with a mixture of envy and calculation, Alexander sulking by the bar after being rebuffed by yet another woman. But these peripheral seances seemed less important now. What mattered was here, in this moment, Isaiah's arms around her, the music they had created together, the future they were building, not despite their differences, but because of them. "Come," she said suddenly, taking Isaiah's hand. "I want to show you something." She led him away from the crowded dance floor, past the tables where guests lingered over dessert and coffee, beyond the formal gardens to a path that wound up into the hills. It was the same path they had taken a year ago, when Isaiah had first shared his music and his memories of Naomi. The clearing looked just as it had that night, a flat expanse of grass surrounded by ancient oak trees, open to the star-filled sky above. But now a simple wooden bench had been placed beneath the largest tree, positioned to overlook the vineyard and estate below. "I come here sometimes," Eloise explained as they sat on the bench, "to think, to remember." Isaiah's arm went around her shoulders, drawing her close against the cool night air. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Peaceful." From their vantage point, they could see the gala continuing below, the lights, the movement of guests, the distant sounds of music and laughter. But here they were alone, separate from the social world that had once defined Eloise's existence and that Isaiah had never truly belonged to. "I've been thinking," Eloise said after a comfortable silence, "about the future, about what we're building, separately and together." Isaiah turned to look at her, attentive as always. "What about it?" "The cottage is a beginning," she said, choosing her words carefully. "A place for you to create, to connect with the foundation work, but eventually—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Eventually, I hope we might consider something more permanent." Understanding dawned in Isaiah's eyes. "Eloise Sinclair," he said with gentle humor, "are you proposing to me?" She laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Not exactly, not yet, but I wanted you to know that's where my heart is heading." She looked up at him, suddenly serious. "I know it's complicated. Your career taking off, my responsibilities here, my father's expectations, your memories of Naomi." Isaiah's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Life is complicated," he agreed, "but some things are simple." He leaned forward to kiss her softly. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. The details, we'll figure those out together." The certainty in his voice, the steadiness of his love, these were the gifts Isaiah had brought into Eloise's life. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the quiet assurance that some connections, once formed, could weather any challenge. "Together," she repeated, settling against him as they looked out over the vineyard hills, silver in the moonlight. Below them, the gala continued, a celebration of harvest, of music, of new beginnings. From the stage, the band began a new song, the melody drifting up to their hillside retreat like a blessing. "We should go back soon," Eloise said, though she made no move to leave the peaceful clearing. "People will notice we're missing." "Let them notice," Isaiah replied, his fingers lacing throughout hers. "We've earned this moment." And so they stayed, the vineyard heiress and the violinist, watching the stars wheel overhead, the future stretching before them, like the endless rows of vines below. Orderly yet wild, rooted yet reaching always toward the light. When they finally returned to the gala, hand in hand, they found the celebration winding down. Most guests had departed, leaving only close friends and family lingering over final glasses of wine. Richard Sinclair stood on the terrace, watching their approach with an expression that had softened slightly since the beginning of the evening. Perhaps it was the success of the gala, or the wine, or simply the undeniable evidence of his daughter's happiness. Whatever the reason, when Isaiah extended his hand, Richard took it without hesitation. "Your cottage will be ready next week," he told the younger man. "Eloise has seen to all the details." "Thank you, sir," Isaiah replied, "for everything." Richard nodded, his gaze moving to his daughter. The foundation launch was a success. Donations exceeded our projections. "I'm glad," Eloise said sincerely. Her father hesitated, then added, "Your mother would have approved of the foundation. She always believed in the importance of music education." The rare mention of her mother caught Eloise by surprise. "I didn't know that," she said softly. "There's a lot about her I've never told you," Richard admitted. "Perhaps it's time I did." The offering of memories, of connection, of a part of himself Richard usually kept closely guarded, was not lost on Eloise. "I'd like that very much," she said. Her father nodded, then straightened his already impeccable tie. Well, I should see to the remaining guests. Belle, I expect we'll be seeing more of you around the estate now. Yes, sir, Isaiah confirmed. I hope that's acceptable. Richard's expression was wry but not unkind. I suspect my opinion on the matter is largely irrelevant at this point. He looked between them, resignation mingling with a grudging respect. Good night, both of you. After he had gone, Isaiah turned to Eloise. He's trying, he observed. Yes, she agreed with a small smile. We all are. The night air had grown cooler, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of grapes and earth across the terrace. Isaiah drew Eloise into his arms, her head resting naturally against his shoulder. 1 year ago, he said softly, I stood in this exact spot, a gardener with a violin case wondering what the imperious Ms. Sinclair would demand of me next. Eloise laughed against his chest. And now? Isaiah tilted her face up to his. Now I stand here as a man who has found his music again, his purpose, and the love he never thought he'd feel after losing everything. Not everything, Eloise corrected gently. The music was always there, beneath the thorns, waiting. Like you, Isaiah said, lowering his lips to hers, waiting to be discovered. Their kiss was tender and unhurried, a promise of all that lay ahead, the challenges they would face, the music they would create, the life they would build together among the vineyard hills. In the distance, a single violin note echoed from the now empty stage, perhaps a musician packing up, testing a string one last time. The sound floated across the terrace, pure and perfect in the night air. Isaiah smiled against Eloise's lips. Do you hear that? He whispered. She nodded, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Our song, she replied, just beginning. And as they stood together beneath the stars, surrounded by the vineyard that had brought them together, and the music that had healed them both, Eloise Sinclair and Isaiah Bell knew that whatever the future held, they would face it as they had found each other, unexpectedly, imperfectly, but with a harmony that transcended all differences. A harmony as rich and complex as the finest wine, as beautiful and